Vanessa Sinclair pressed her phone against her ear, her voice barely a whisper. "Listen to me carefully. That little boy needs to be gone before the wedding. I don't care how you do it. Just make it look like an accident." She ended the call and turned to face the mirror, practiced her smile. Soft, warm, loving, the smile of a devoted stepmother-to-be. Downstairs, 2-year-old Ethan Thompson was playing alone in the garden, reaching toward something slithering through the grass, something his future stepmother had paid $15,000 to put there. And the only person who saw what was about to happen was a cleaning lady scrubbing bathroom floors on the second floor. A woman everyone in that mansion had forgotten existed. Her name was Grace Carter, and in the next 30 seconds, she would either save a child's life or watch him die. Before we go any further, I need you to do something. Tell me where you're watching from right now. What city? What country? What time is it there? Drop it in the comments because I love seeing how far these stories travel. And please hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the very end. Because what happens next in this story will make you question every person you've ever trusted. Now let me take you back to that October afternoon when everything changed. The scream that ripped through the Thompson mansion would haunt everyone who heard it for years to come. Grace Carter was on her knees scrubbing marble tiles when the sound hit her like a physical blow. She knew screams. She'd grown up surrounded by wounded animals, had heard every variation of pain and fear a living creature could produce. This one was different. This one was death announcing its arrival. She was running before she knew she'd moved. 8 months. 8 months she'd worked in this house, invisible as the wallpaper, important as the dust she swept away. Nobody learned her name. Nobody met her eyes. She was the woman in gray who made dirt disappear and asked no questions, but Grace noticed everything. She noticed how Richard Thompson kissed his fiancée every morning, but never really looked at her. She noticed how Vanessa Sinclair's smile flickered off the moment she thought no one was watching. She noticed how little Ethan's nanny spent more time on her phone than watching the child. And right now, staring out the second-floor window, she noticed that the garden below had turned into a death trap. Ethan sat alone in the grass. No nanny, no adult, just a 2-year-old boy reaching toward something dark and coiled near the rose bushes. "No," Grace breathed. "No, no, no." The snake was massive. 5 feet of muscle and venom, its diamond-patterned scales catching afternoon light as it raised its head toward the child. Timber rattlesnake. One bite would kill a grown man. For a toddler, death would come in minutes. Grace flew down the stairs. Margaret the cook looked up from her cutting board. "Grace, what's wrong?" Grace didn't answer. She blew past the kitchen, slammed through the back door, and sprinted across the terrace. 20 feet from Ethan now. The snake's body was tensing, coiling tighter, preparing to strike. 15 feet. Ethan was laughing, his chubby fingers inches from the creature's head. "Worm," he said happily. "Big worm. 10 feet. The snake's mouth opened. Grace launched herself forward, one hand grabbing Ethan's waist, the other shooting toward the snake's body just behind its skull. Her fingers closed around cold scales as fangs snapped at empty air. The snake thrashed violently. Its body whipped around her forearm, squeezing, fighting, trying to twist free and strike. Grace held on with a grip that had been trained into her since childhood, keeping the deadly head pointed away from skin. "Gracie?" Ethan wailed, terrified by the sudden violence. "Gracie, scary. I know, baby, I know." "It's okay. You're safe." Footsteps pounded across the lawn. Derek Webb, the family driver, reached her first. His face went white. "Jesus Christ, is that a rattlesnake?" "Take Ethan," Grace said through gritted teeth. "Get him inside, now." "But you need help. You can't just..." "Derek, take the boy." Something in her voice made him obey. He scooped Ethan from the grass and ran toward the house. Grace walked slowly toward the back fence toward the tree line where the property met thick Connecticut woods. Her arm burned. The snake weighed at least 8 pounds, and every ounce of it was trying to kill her. She'd done this before. Different snakes. Different circumstances. A lifetime ago in a place she'd tried to forget. At the fence line, she released the creature and watched it disappear into the underbrush. When she turned around, chaos had erupted. Staff members were running from every direction. The security team had appeared from nowhere. Margaret stood on this terrace with her hand pressed against her heart, tears streaming down her face. And there, at the center of it all, stood Richard Thompson. The billionaire tech founder clutched his son against his chest like the boy might evaporate if he let go. His face was the color of ash. His whole body trembled. "How?" he whispered when Grace approached. "How did you do that?" Grace didn't answer immediately. Her attention had been caught by something else. Someone else. Vanessa Sinclair stood slightly behind Richard, one perfectly manicured hand resting on his shoulder. She was beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful. Flawless hair, designer dress, face arranged in an expression of shock and relief. But her eyes told a different story. Grace had spent her childhood reading animals, learning to see what they really felt beneath fur and feathers and scales. And right now, looking at Vanessa Sinclair, she saw something that made her blood freeze. Not shock, not gratitude, not the desperate relief of a woman who'd almost watched her future stepson die. Calculation. Cold, careful calculation, like a chess player watching an unexpected move disrupt her strategy. "The nanny," Grace said, forcing her voice steady. "Where was the nanny?" The young woman was already pushing through the crowd, sobbing. "I only stepped inside for 1 minute. 1 minute I thought the garden was safe. I never imagined." "It's okay, Emma," Richard said automatically. "Accidents happen. Snakes wander in from the woods sometimes." "Do they?" Grace asked quietly. Richard frowned. "What? In 8 months I've never seen a snake in this garden, not even a harmless one. And timber rattlesnakes don't typically wander into estates with 6-foot fences and professional pest control." Silence fell over the group. Vanessa's expression flickered, just for a fraction of a second. Then her concerned mask was back in place. "What are you suggesting?" she asked sweetly. "That someone put it there deliberately." Grace met her eyes. "Held them." "I'm not suggesting anything, Ms. Sinclair. Just making an observation." The moment stretched between them like a wire pulled tight. Richard broke it. "That's enough speculation for now. The important thing is Ethan is safe." He looked at Grace with something new in his eye, something like recognition. "We need to talk. Tomorrow morning, my office, 9 o'clock. Grace nodded. As the crowd dispersed and normalcy struggled to reassert itself, she felt Vanessa's gaze on her back like a cold finger tracing her spine. The game had changed, and both of them knew it. That night, Grace sat alone in her small apartment across town, staring at her hands. They'd stopped shaking hours ago, but she could still feel the snake's body wrapped around her forearm. Could still feel its desperate strength, its singular focus on ending a life. Her phone lay on the table, Richard's message glowing on the screen. "Thank you for saving my son's life. Please come to my office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. We need to talk." We need to talk. 4 words that could mean anything. A bonus, a thank you, an interrogation about how a cleaning lady knew how to catch venomous snakes with her bare hands. Grace picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in 5 years. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Riverside Animal Hospital, this is Dr. Patterson." "It's Grace." Silence, then, "Grace Carter." "My God, where have you been? After the fire you just disappeared. Nobody knew if you were alive or, I'm alive, I'm in Connecticut, I need to ask you something." "Anything." "Timber rattlesnakes. Would someone be able to buy one illegally?" Another pause. "Why are you asking me? Please, Doc, it's important." She heard him sigh. "Yes, there's a black market for venomous reptiles. Collectors mostly, but occasionally other buyers. People who want them for less savory purposes. Could you trace a sale like that?" "Maybe, if you knew where to look. Grace, what's going on?" "I'm not sure yet, but if I'm right, someone just tried to murder a 2-year-old boy." She heard his sharp intake of breath. "Jesus. If I send you photos of the snake, could you tell me anything about where it might have come from? Marking subspecies, anything that might help." "Send them. I'll do what I can." Grace thanked him and ended the call. She pulled up the photos she'd taken of the snake before releasing it, texted them to Dr. Patterson, and sat back to wait. Sleep didn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan's face. His happy smile as he reached toward death. His absolute trust when he'd looked up at her and called her name. Gracie? Nobody had called her that since her father died. Her gaze drifted to the drawer where she kept the photograph. The one she couldn't look at but couldn't throw away. Her father's face on the day of her 25th birthday, 2 weeks before the fire that killed him. "You've got good instincts, Gracie girl," he used to say. "Trust them. They'll save your life someday. Or someone else's." Today, they'd saved a little boy, but Grace couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. At 8:45 the next morning, Grace stood at the front door of the Thompson mansion for the first time. The butler who answered looked at her like she'd grown a second head. Staff used the back entrance. Always. It was an unwritten rule that everyone understood. "Mr. Thompson is expecting me," Grace said firmly. The butler's expression shifted to confusion, then reluctant acceptance. "This way." Richard's office was all dark wood and leather, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden, where everything had happened yesterday. Grace tried not to look at the rose bushes. Tried not to imagine what would have happened if she'd been 30 seconds slower. Richard sat behind a desk that probably cost more than her car. He looked like he hadn't slept. A whiskey glass sat at his elbow, empty. "Please," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Sit down." Grace sat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Richard pulled out his tablet and turned it to face her. Security footage. The garden. Grace watched herself sprint across the lawn, grab Ethan, catch the snake in one fluid motion. "I've watched this 50 times, Richard said quietly. "Each time I noticed something new. The way you moved. No hesitation, no fear. You grabbed that snake like you've done it 1,000 times before." "I have." "Tell me." Grace had prepared a careful, edited version of the truth. But sitting here now with Richard's exhausted gratitude filling the space between them, she found herself saying more than she'd planned. "My father ran a wildlife sanctuary in Georgia. I grew up there, surrounded by animals most people only see behind glass. Bears, hawks, bobcats, and snakes." She paused. "Lots of snakes. A sanctuary, a rescue center for injured and abandoned animals. My father spent his whole life caring for creatures nobody else wanted. He taught me everything, how to read their behavior, how to handle even the dangerous ones safely." She looked down at her hands. "How to respect them without fearing them." Richard leaned forward. "Why did you leave?" The question hit like a fist to the chest. Grace felt her carefully constructed walls tremble. "There was a fire. 5 years ago. It started in the electrical system of the main building." Her voice went flat, automatic, the way it always did when she talked about this. "My father ran inside to release the animals from their enclosures. He got most of them out. But not himself. No, not himself." Silence stretched between them. "I'm sorry," Richard said finally. "Truly. It was a long time ago. Grief doesn't care about calendars." Something in his voice made her look up. In his eyes she saw a reflection of her own loss, a recognition that only comes from those who've walked through the same fire. "Your wife," she said quietly. "Ethan's mother." Richard nodded. "Charlotte. She died giving birth to him. Complications nobody saw coming. One minute I was holding her hand, telling her we were almost there, and the next..." He swallowed hard. "I know what it's like to watch someone you love disappear." The moment hung between them, fragile and unexpected. Then Richard straightened, shifting back to business mode. "I want to offer you a new position. Ethan's personal caregiver, not just a nanny, something more, someone with real authority to make decisions about his safety." He named a salary that made Grace's head spin. "You'll have a private room here in the house, direct access to me whenever you need it, and the full support of my security team." "Mr. Thompson." "Richard, please." "Richard." Grace hesitated. "I appreciate the offer, but I need you to understand what you're asking. If I take this job, I'm not going to be quiet. I'm not going to ignore things that don't add up, and I'm not going to pretend that what happened yesterday was just an accident." Their eyes met. Something passed between them. "That's exactly why I want you," Richard said. Grace thought about the snake, about Vanessa's calculating stare, about a little boy who called her Gracie and trusted her completely. "Okay," she said, "I'll do it." Richard's relief was palpable. He stood and extended his hand. "Welcome to the family, Grace." As their hands met, the office door opened. Vanessa swept in wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than Grace's apartment. Her smile was perfect. Practiced. Utterly false. "Darling, I've been looking everywhere for you." She noticed Grace and her expression flickered. "Oh, I didn't realize you were in a meeting." "Grace is joining us," Richard said. "I've offered her a position as Ethan's personal caregiver. She accepted." "How wonderful." Vanessa's voice was honey over ice. "It's so comforting to know little Ethan will have someone so capable looking after him." "I'll do my best," Grace said neutrally. Vanessa moved to Richard's side, sliding her arm through his possessively. "We should celebrate. Perhaps a family dinner tonight, just the 4 of us. You, me, little Ethan, and our new caregiver." The way she said caregiver made it sound like something scraped off her designer shoes. "That sounds lovely," Richard said, oblivious to the undertone. "Grace, please join us. 7 o'clock. Grace nodded. "I'll be there." She left the office feeling Vanessa's gaze boring into her back. In the hallway, she nearly collided with Derek Webb. "Sorry," Derek said, steadying her. "Didn't see you coming." He glanced toward the office door. "Big meeting with the boss." "Something like that." Derek studied her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Word of advice, be careful who you trust in this house. Not everyone is what they seem. Speaking from experience, a shadow crossed his face. Just an observation. He walked away before she could ask more. Grace watched him go, filing the encounter away for later analysis. Then she went to find Ethan. The little boy was in the playroom with Emma the nanny. Grace paused in the doorway, watching. Emma sat on the couch scrolling through her phone while Ethan played alone on the floor, building something unidentifiable with wooden blocks. The young woman looked bored, disconnected, like babysitting a billionaire's heir was just another tedious job. "Emma!" The nanny jumped, nearly dropping her phone. "Oh, Grace, I didn't hear you." "I'm taking over Ethan's care starting now. Mr. Thompson's orders." Emma's face cycled through surprise, hurt, and finally relief. "Really, I mean, okay, should I stay for a transition period, or that won't be necessary?" Grace's tone left no room for discussion. Emma grabbed her bag and hurried out, leaving Grace alone with the boy. Ethan looked up at her with enormous blue eyes. "Gracie." He pushed himself to his feet and toddled toward her, arms raised. "Up, up." Grace scooped him into her arms. He was warm and solid and smelled like baby shampoo. "Hey there, little man, remember me?" "Gracie saved me," Ethan said solemnly, "from the scary worm." Grace felt her throat tighten. "That's right, and I'm going to keep saving you every single day, okay?" He nodded seriously. Then he wrapped his small arms around her neck and squeezed. In that moment, holding this child who'd almost died 24 hours ago, Grace made a silent vow. Whoever put that snake in the garden, whoever wanted this boy dead, she would find them. She would stop them, and God help anyone who got in her way. The family dinner that night was an exercise in psychological warfare. The four of them sat around a table designed for 20 candles flickering in silver holders, multiple courses served by staff who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Ethan sat in his high chair between Richard and Grace, happily mashing peas with his fist. Vanessa held court like a queen. "The wedding plans are coming along beautifully," she announced, sipping wine that cost more per bottle than Grace used to make in a week. "The florist finally confirmed the peonies, and the string quartet from New York is absolutely divine." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Richard said. His attention was split between his fiancée and his son. Grace noticed he smiled more at Ethan. "Of course, with all the excitement yesterday, I haven't had time to finalize the seating chart." Vanessa's gaze slid to Grace. "Grace, you must have opinions about proper arrangement, coming from a more humble background." The insult was wrapped in silk, but its edges were sharp enough to cut. "I grew up on a farm, not under a rock," Grace replied calmly. "But no, I don't have strong feelings about seating charts." Vanessa's smile tightened. "How refreshing. A woman without pretensions." "Vanessa," Richard said quietly, a warning. "What I meant it as a compliment." She reached over to touch Ethan's head. The boy flinched, slight but unmistakable. "Poor little thing, still traumatized from yesterday, I'm sure." Grace watched the interaction carefully. Ethan didn't lean into Vanessa's touch, didn't smile at her. He turned his face toward Grace instead. "Gracie," he said, reaching for her. "Want Gracie." Something flickered in Vanessa's eyes. Just for a second. Something dark and poisonous. Then it was gone. "Children," she said lightly. "So fickle with their affections." After dinner, Grace put Ethan to bed while Richard and Vanessa retired to the living room for drinks. She sang to him softly the lullaby her father used to sing when she was small. "Sleep now, little one, the stars are watching over you. Sleep now, precious child, tomorrow brings adventures new." Ethan's eyes drooped. His breathing slowed. Within minutes, he was asleep. Grace checked the window. Locked. She tested the lock twice. Checked the closet, under the bed, behind the curtains. Clear. She was about to leave when she heard voices in the hallway. Low, tense. She pressed herself against the wall near the door and listened. "Don't understand why you're so obsessed with her." Vanessa's voice barely controlled anger. "I'm not obsessed. I'm grateful. She saved my son's life." "A cleaning lady? You're giving authority in your house to a cleaning lady?" "She's more than that. You saw what she did. The way she handled that snake. She has skills, Vanessa. Training. She can protect Ethan in ways a regular nanny never could." A cold laugh. "Protect him? From what, a freak accident? Richard, you're being paranoid." "Maybe, but after what happened, I'd rather be paranoid than sorry." Footsteps approached. Grace slipped back toward Ethan's bed, pretending to adjust his blanket. The door opened. Vanessa appeared. "Still here?" Her smile was razor thin. "How dedicated." Just making sure he's settled." "I'm sure you are." Vanessa stepped into the room, her perfume overwhelming. "Let me give you some friendly advice, Grace. I know Richard has expanded your role, but don't forget your place. This is my home, my family. You're here to serve, not to insert yourself." Grace straightened to her full height. She was several inches shorter than Vanessa, but somehow the other woman seemed to shrink. "My place," Grace said quietly, "is between Ethan and anything that might hurt him. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should ask yourself why." Vanessa's eyes went flat. "Dead. Like a shark's eyes before it strikes." "Be very careful," she whispered. "Very, very careful." She left without another word. Grace stood alone in the darkness of Ethan's room, heart-pounding, mind racing. The mask had slipped, just for a second, but long enough. Vanessa Sinclair wasn't just cold. She was dangerous, and she'd just made it clear that Grace was standing in her way. The next morning, Grace began her investigation in earnest. She woke at 5 before the house staff arrived and walked the entire property with a flashlight. The fence line, the garden walls, every possible entry point a snake might have used or been carried through. Near the back corner, hidden behind an ornamental hedge, she found what she was looking for. A section of fence with loose boards. Not broken, not damaged, just loose enough that someone could remove them, create an opening, and replace them when finished. Grace photographed everything. The boards, the disturbed soil, the faint footprints in the mulch nearby, size 10 or 11 she estimated, a man's shoe. She was replacing the last board when her phone buzzed. "Dr. Patterson." "I found something," he said without preamble. "That snake you photographed, it's not wild." Grace's heart rate spiked. "What do you mean? The markings, the scale patterns. This specific coloration is bred, not natural. There's a guy in Florida who specializes in exotic rattlesnakes, sells them to collectors, zoos, and..." He paused. "Other buyers." "Can you get me his contact information?" "Already texted it to you. Grace, whoever bought this snake paid serious money. We're talking 5 figures at least. This wasn't random. This was planned." Grace thanked him and hung up. Her hands were trembling. 5 figures, $15,000 or more for a snake meant to kill a 2-year-old boy. Someone wanted Ethan dead badly enough to spend a small fortune making it happen. And Grace was the only person who knew. Over the next 3 days, she established a new routine while watching everyone in the house like they were suspects in a crime, which she reminded herself they were. She arrived at Ethan's room by 6 each morning, checked every window, every door, every possible entry point. Then she took him through his day, never letting him out of her sight. They played in the garden together, always supervised. Read books in the library. Built block towers in the playroom. And everywhere they went, Grace watched. She watched Derek making unnecessary trips to the garden shed, disappearing for 30 or 40 minutes at a time. She watched the new gardener, a man named Lucas, who'd been hired 2 weeks before the snake incident. He avoided eye contact, knew the property's blind spots, spent too much time near the back fence. She watched Vanessa's patterns of movement, the way she was never around when something went wrong. The phone calls she took behind closed doors, her voice dropping to a whisper whenever anyone approached. And she noticed small things, wrong things. Garden tools moved to new locations overnight. Doors that should have been locked standing open. Ethan's toys ending up in places he couldn't have put them. Someone was testing the household, probing for weaknesses, watching to see who noticed. On the 3rd day, Grace found proof. She was putting Ethan down for his afternoon nap when she saw the window. It was open, just a crack, barely visible, but she'd locked it that morning. She was absolutely certain. "Stay here, sweetheart," she told Ethan, tucking him under his blanket. "I'll be right back." She went to the window and examined it carefully. The lock wasn't broken, but there were scratches around it. Fresh scratches. The kind made by a tool prying it open from the outside. Grace leaned out and looked down. Ethan's room was on the 2nd floor, but a wooden trellis covered in ivy ran up the wall below, sturdy enough to climb, and there caught in the ivy fluttering in the October breeze was a piece of fabric. Dark blue, maybe from a shirt, maybe from a jacket. Grace's hands shook as she retrieved it. Someone had climbed to this window, to a child's bedroom. Someone had tried to get inside while that child slept. She looked back at Ethan, already half asleep, his small chest rising and falling peacefully. Rage unlike anything she'd felt in years flooded through her. Whoever was doing this had been inches from a sleeping child, inches from doing God knows what. She would find them. She would stop them, whatever it took. That night, after Ethan was safely asleep and the house had settled into darkness, Grace crept along the back fence with her flashlight again. The loose boards were still in place, but now she noticed something else. Tire tracks, fresh ones, leading from the back fence into the woods. Someone had driven here recently, parked in the trees, come through the gap in the fence. She was photographing the tracks when her phone buzzed. Margaret, the cook. "Grace, can you come to the kitchen? There's something you should see." 5 minutes later, Grace stood in the massive Thompson kitchen, while Margaret wrung her hands nervously. "I wasn't going to say anything," the older woman said. "It's not my place to gossip, but after what happened with the snake and now with you asking questions—" "What is it, Margaret?" The cook glanced around, making sure they were alone. "The night before the snake attack, I was working late, preparing for Mr. Thompson's breakfast meeting the next day, and I saw something." Grace's heart rate accelerated. "What did you see?" "Ms. Sinclair, coming in through the back door, after midnight. She was carrying something, a container of some kind, like a cooler." "A cooler." "I thought it was strange, but I didn't want to assume anything. She said she'd been visiting a sick friend, Tatse, bringing them soup." Margaret shook her head. "But Grace, it was the middle of the night, and she wasn't carrying that cooler when she went out. I saw her leave earlier, empty-handed." Grace felt puzzle pieces clicking into place. "Have you told anyone else about this?" "No, like I said, it's not my place. But you're different. You're actually trying to protect that little boy." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I've known Ethan since he was born. I can't stand the thought of anything happening to him." "Margaret, I need you to keep this between us for now. Don't tell anyone. Not Richard, not the other staff, nobody. Can you do that?" The cook nodded. "I can, but Grace? Be careful. That woman, she's not what she seems. I've worked in this house for 15 years. I know when someone doesn't belong." Grace thanked her and left her mind churning. Vanessa, coming home after midnight with a cooler. The night before, a venomous snake appeared in the garden. It wasn't proof, not the kind that would hold up in court, but it was enough to confirm what Grace already suspected. Vanessa Sinclair was trying to kill her future stepson. The question was how to prove it, and how to stop her before she succeeded. The next morning, Grace found the note. It was tucked under Ethan's pillow. She discovered it when she went to wake him for breakfast. A simple piece of paper, folded once. Words printed in generic computer font that could have come from any printer in the house. "Stop asking questions. Accidents happen to people who see too much." Grace's blood turned to ice. They knew. Whoever was behind this, they knew she was investigating. They'd been in Ethan's room, again, while the child slept, while everyone thought he was safe. She pocketed the note quickly, her hands trembling. This changed everything. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't her imagination. Someone in this house wanted Ethan dead, and now they knew Grace was standing in their way, which meant she had a target on her back too. That evening, Richard called an emergency staff meeting. Grace sat in the back of the room with Ethan on her lap, watching everyone file in. Derek, Margaret, Lucas the gardener, the security team, the housekeepers. 24 people who lived and worked in this house. Any one of whom could be the enemy. Richard stood at the front, saw Vanessa beside him. His face was drawn, tired. "There have been some disturbing developments, Chum," he announced. "Items have gone missing from the house. Small things at first. But yesterday I discovered a valuable painting has been stolen from the East Wing." Murmurs rippled through the assembled staff. "The police will be conducting a full investigation. There will be background checks on everyone. I want to assure you that I'm not making accusations. But I need to know who's been stealing from my family." Grace watched faces. Surprise, fear, indignation, confusion, and there on Vanessa's face something that looked almost like satisfaction, like everything was going according to plan. After the meeting, Vanessa approached Grace. "Could I speak with you privately?" They walked to a quiet corner of the hallway. Vanessa's demeanor had shifted completely. Gone was the cold superiority. In its place was something almost vulnerable. "I know this must be frightening for everyone," Vanessa said softly. "The thefts, the uncertainty, I've been worried about security for weeks." "Have you?" "I've tried to convince Richard to be more careful. He dismisses my concerns as paranoia." She glanced around, lowering her voice. "Can I tell you something in confidence?" Grace waited. "I've noticed Derek acting strangely lately. The driver, he's been making trips to the garden shed at odd hours, disappearing for long stretches." Vanessa paused dramatically. "And the day before the snake attack, I saw him arguing with someone outside. A man I didn't recognize. It looked heated." Did you tell Richard? I asked Derek about it later. He claimed it was just a delivery person having a bad day, but something about his answer felt wrong. His eyes shifted, his voice cracked. Vanessa placed a hand on Grace's arm. I'm not accusing anyone, but please keep an eye on him for Ethan's sake. The story was detailed, specific, believable, too perfectly timed. I'll watch him, Grace said carefully. Vanessa smiled. I knew I could count on you. She walked away and Grace stood alone, turning over every word. Derek was a problem. That's what Vanessa wanted her to think, which meant either Derek was genuinely suspicious or someone was setting him up. That night, Grace made a decision that could destroy everything. She waited until the house fell silent, until the security cameras cycled to their blind spots, until she was certain everyone was asleep. Then she crept down to Derek's room in the staff quarters. Her heart hammered as she opened the door. This was wrong. Illegal, probably. But the threatening note had changed the rules. Someone had been in Ethan's room twice now. Someone wanted that child dead. She had to know if it was Derek. His room was neat, almost obsessively organized. Clothes hung in precise rows, books arranged by size, everything in its place. She searched quickly, methodically, looking for anything connecting him to the snake, the window, the thefts. She found nothing suspicious, just normal belongings of a man who'd worked for the Thompson family for years. She was about to leave when she noticed a photograph on his desk. Derek with a woman and a young boy at an amusement park, all three smiling. The boy looked about Ethan's age. Grace picked up the photo and turned it over. Written on the back, My World, My Reason, Sarah and Tyler, July 2023. Her chest tightened. Derek had a family, a son almost exactly Ethan's age. This wasn't a man planning to kill a child. This was a father who understood what that child meant. She was replacing the photo when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Grace froze. The footsteps came closer, stopped right outside Derek's door. She pressed herself against the wall behind the door, barely breathing. The doorknob turned, Light spilled in. A figure stepped inside, moving with practiced silence. Went straight to Derek's desk, opened the bottom drawer, searched, found something. An envelope. Examined the contents. Smiled. Then pocketed the envelope and left as quietly as they'd come. Grace didn't breathe until the footsteps faded completely, because she'd recognized that silhouette, that perfume, that cold, satisfied smile. Vanessa. Vanessa had just planted something in Derek's room. Evidence. Something to make him look guilty. Derek was being framed, which meant Vanessa was behind everything. Grace stood in the darkness of that small room, her mind racing with implications. Vanessa wanted Ethan dead, had arranged the snake, had been climbing to his window, was now framing an innocent man to take the fall. But why money? Always money. Ethan was Richard's heir. If the boy died, and Richard eventually passed, his fortune would go to his wife, to Vanessa. And if it looked like a troubled employee was responsible if Derek went to prison for crimes he didn't commit, then Vanessa would have everything. Richard's money, Richard's heart, Richard's grief making him desperate for her comfort. It was perfect, diabolical, and completely unprovable. Grace had no evidence, just her word against Vanessa's. A former cleaning lady against the woman Richard loved and planned to marry. Who would he believe? She crept back to her own room as the first gray light of dawn crept over the horizon. Tomorrow she would have to decide what to do. Go to Richard with what she'd seen and risk being dismissed as jealous or paranoid. Or stay silent. Keep gathering evidence. Wait for Vanessa to make a mistake. Both options were dangerous, but only one of them might save Ethan's life. She sat by her window watching the sun rise over the Connecticut hills and thought about her father. Trust your instincts, Gracie girl. They'll save your life someday, or someone else's. She'd failed to save him. Had watched him disappear into smoke and flames while strong hands held her back. Had lived with that failure every day for 5 years. She wouldn't fail again. Whatever it took, whatever it cost. She would protect that little boy, and God help anyone who got in her way. Outside, the October morning grew cold. Somewhere in the mansion, a monster slept peacefully in silk sheets, dreaming of the fortune that would soon be hers. And somewhere in the staff quarters, a former cleaning lady made a promise to a ghost. I won't let her hurt him, Dad. I swear it. I won't let her win. The hunter had become the hunted. She just didn't know it yet. The police arrived at 7 the next morning. Grace was feeding Ethan his breakfast when she heard the sirens. 2 patrol cars rolled up the driveway, followed by an unmarked sedan. She picked up the boy and carried him to the window, watching as officers emerged and walked toward the front entrance. Richard appeared in the foyer, still in his robe, confusion written across his face. "What's going on?" Grace heard him ask. The lead detective, a gray-haired man with tired eyes, handed him a piece of paper. "Search warrant, Mr. Thompson. We received an anonymous tip about stolen property on your premises." "Anonymous tip from whom?" "Can't disclose that, sir. We need to search the staff quarters." Grace's stomach dropped. She knew exactly what they would find, exactly where they would find it, and exactly who had put it there. 20 minutes later, Derek Webb was led out of the house in handcuffs. He looked confused, terrified, like a man watching his entire life crumble around him without understanding why. "I didn't do anything," he shouted as officers pushed him toward the patrol car. Richard, please, I've worked for you for 3 years. I would never steal from you." Richard stood on the front steps, his face pale. Vanessa was beside him, one hand pressed to her chest in a perfect imitation of shock. "I can't believe it," she breathed. "Derek, of all people." Grace watched the scene from Ethan's window, the little boy squirming in her arms. "Why is Derek sad?" Ethan asked. "Why are the police taking him?" "I don't know, sweetheart," Grace lied, "but everything's going to be okay." She watched the patrol car disappear down the driveway, watched Vanessa lean into Richard's embrace, whispering comfort, watched the other staff members huddle in shocked groups, whispering among themselves. And she made a decision. She couldn't stay silent anymore. The stakes were too high. Derek was an innocent man being destroyed, and Ethan was still in danger from the woman everyone trusted. She had to tell Richard the truth. Tonight. The hours crawled by. Grace went through her routine with Ethan mechanically, her mind churning with trying with how to approach the conversation, what to say, how to make Richard believe her. At 6 o'clock, she put Ethan to bed early, sang him his lullaby, checked every window twice. Then she went to find Richard. He was in his office alone, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The bottle on his desk was half empty. "Grace?" He looked up when she knocked. "Come in, please." She closed the door behind her. "We need to talk." "I know, sit down." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "I've been thinking all day. Something about this doesn't add up." Grace's heart jumped. "What do you mean?" "Derek, he's been with me for 3 years. He's never taken a sick day, never complained about his salary. His background check was spotless." Richard shook his head slowly. "And suddenly he's a thief stealing paintings. It doesn't make sense." "What if he's not?" Richard looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" Grace took a deep breath. This was the moment, the point of no return. "Last night," she said carefully, "I couldn't sleep. I was walking the halls, checking on things, and I saw something." "What did you see?" "Vanessa going into Derek's room." Richard's face went still. "What?" "It was after midnight. She thought everyone was asleep. I watched her open his desk drawer and put something inside. An envelope." Grace met his eyes. "Richard, I think she planted the evidence. I think she's framing Derek." For a long moment, Richard didn't move, didn't speak. The only sound was the ticking of the antique clock on his wall. Then he stood up so violently his chair crashed backward. "That's insane," he said. "That's absolutely insane. Vanessa would never. She's not capable of... I know what I saw." "You saw her in his room. That doesn't mean..." "Richard." Grace stood too. "There's more. The night before the snake attack, Margaret saw Vanessa coming in through the back door after midnight. She was carrying a cooler she didn't have when she left." Richard's face was cycling through emotions. Denial, confusion, the first stirrings of doubt. Why would she do this? She loves me. She loves Ethan. Does she... Grace pulled the threatening note from her pocket and laid it on his desk. "I found this under Ethan's pillow 2 days ago. Someone was in his room while he slept. Someone who wanted to warn me to stop asking questions." Richard picked up the paper with trembling hands. "Read the words. Read them again." "This could be from anyone," he said, but his voice was weaker now. "The same day I found that note, I found Ethan's window unlocked. Someone had pried it open from outside. They'd climbed the trellis to reach a 2-year-old boy's bedroom." Grace stepped closer. "Richard, I know this is hard to hear. I know you love her, but I'm telling you the truth. Vanessa is trying to hurt your son." "Why, what could she possibly gain from everything?" Grace's voice was flat. "She gains everything. Ethan is your only heir. If something happens to him and eventually something happens to you, where does your money go?" Richard's face went gray. The color drained from his cheeks like water from a tub. "My wife," he whispered. "It would go to my wife." "And who is about to become your wife?" The whiskey glass slipped from Richard's fingers, shattered on the hardwood floor. He didn't seem to notice. "This can't be real," he said. "This can't be happening. I've known Vanessa for years. She was Charlotte's best friend. She was there when Ethan was born. She helped me through the worst time of my life." Which put her in the perfect position to manipulate you. Richard sank into his chair, his head in his hands. Grace had never seen a man look so broken. "What do I do, he asked finally, his voice cracked. "If what you're saying is true, what the hell do I do?" Grace sat down across from him. "We set a trap." 2 hours later, they had a plan. Richard would pretend nothing had changed. Continue treating Vanessa like his loving fiancée. Give her no reason to suspect she'd been discovered. Meanwhile, Grace would keep watching, keep documenting, and Richard would create an opportunity for Vanessa to make her move. A business trip, 3 days in Boston. He would take his personal security team, leaving the house vulnerable. Just Vanessa, Grace, Ethan, and a skeleton staff. If Vanessa was planning something, this would be her chance. "I have hidden cameras installed in the hallways," Richard said. "She doesn't know about them. Whatever she does, we'll have proof. And if she tries something while you're gone," Richard pressed a small device into her hand. "Panic button, connected to my phone and the local police. You press this, help will be there in minutes." He closed her fingers around it. "Grace, I need you to understand something. If anything happens to my son while I'm gone, I will never forgive myself. Nothing will happen to him, I promise." "You can't promise that." "I can." Grace held his gaze. "Because I've already lost someone I couldn't save. I won't let it happen again." Something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. "Be careful," Richard said. "Vanessa is more dangerous than I ever imagined. If she realizes you're onto her, she won't, not until it's too late." Richard announced his trip the next morning at breakfast. 3 days in Boston," he said, kissing Vanessa's cheek. "Important meetings with investors. I'm taking Marcus and the security team, but I hate leaving you alone." Vanessa's expression was concern wrapped in sweetness. "We'll be fine, darling. Grace is here, and the staff. Still, call me if anything happens, anything at all." "Of course." Grace watched Vanessa's eyes as Richard spoke, watched the subtle shift in her posture, the almost imperceptible relaxation in her shoulders. She saw what Richard couldn't see, what she'd been trained to recognize since childhood, a predator sensing an opportunity. Richard left that afternoon in a black SUV. Grace stood at the window with Ethan in her arms, watching the car disappear down the long driveway. "Daddy go bye-bye?" Ethan asked. Just for a few days, sweetheart. He'll be back soon." But as she turned from the window, Grace felt eyes on her back. Vanessa stood in the hallway watching her. Her smile was serene, pleasant, the smile of a woman with nothing to hide. "Grace? A word?" "Of course." Vanessa glided closer. Her perfume was overwhelming, suffocating. "I hope you don't mind my saying this, but I'm so glad you're here. With Richard gone, I feel much safer knowing someone capable is watching over Ethan." "That's my job." "Yes, your job." Vanessa's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Though I have to say you've become quite close to Richard lately, all those private meetings in his office." "We were discussing Ethan's care." "Of course you were." Vanessa leaned in close enough that Grace could see the cold emptiness behind her eyes. "Just remember, Grace, men like Richard, they're easily distracted by novelty, but they always come back to what's familiar, what's safe." She straightened. "I'm what's familiar, I'm what's safe, and I intend to stay that way." She walked away, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Grace stood frozen, heart pounding. The threat had been delivered with surgical precision, wrapped in sweetness, dipped in poison. But Vanessa had made a mistake. She'd shown her hand too early, revealed that she was watching Grace just as closely as Grace was watching her. The game had escalated, and Grace was ready. The first night passed quietly. Too quietly. Grace sat in the chair by her window until 3 a.m. watching the grounds, watching for any sign of movement. Nothing. The house was silent. The grounds were still. She finally dozed off, only to jerk awake at dawn with a stiff neck and a racing heart. Day 2 was worse. Vanessa was everywhere, appearing in doorways, showing up unexpectedly when Grace was with Ethan, always watching, always smiling. "You look tired," Vanessa said at lunch, sliding into a chair across from Grace. "Not sleeping well. I'm fine. Nightmares, perhaps? This house can be so unsettling at night. All those shadows, all those strange sounds." Her eyes glittered. A person could imagine all sorts of dangers lurking in the dark. Grace said nothing, but her hand found the panic button in her pocket and held it tight. That afternoon, something happened that changed everything. Grace was putting Ethan down for his nap when she heard voices in the hallway, low, urgent. She pressed her ear against the door. Vanessa's voice, "I don't care what it takes. Tonight. It has to be tonight." A man's voice muffled, but the caregiver, "I'll handle her. Just be ready. The back fence midnight. Don't be late." Footsteps retreated. Silence fell. Grace's blood ran cold. Tonight? Something was happening tonight. She pulled out her phone and texted Richard, "V making move tonight, midnight. Stay ready." His response came seconds later. "I'm 3 blocks away. Hidden cameras are recording. Don't do anything dangerous. Call police if needed." Grace put the phone away. Her hands were shaking. She spent the rest of the day on high alert, checking windows, testing locks, inventorying every possible weapon in the house. A letter opener in the study. Kitchen knives locked in a drawer. Fire extinguisher in the hallway. She would protect Ethan with her bare hands if she had to. Dinner that night was a performance worthy of Broadway. Vanessa played the gracious hostess, chatting about wedding plans and flower arrangements while Grace nodded along, pretending to listen. Ethan sat between them, oblivious to the tension crackling like static electricity. "You seem distracted, Grace," Vanessa observed. "Is everything all right?" "Just tired, like you said." Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. "Perhaps you should get some rest tonight. I can check on Ethan myself." "That won't be necessary." "I insist. You've been working so hard. Take a break. Let me be a mother figure for once." The word mother hit Grace like a slap. She saw Ethan's face, his trusting eyes, his innocent smile. "I'll take care of Ethan," Grace said firmly. "It's what Richard hired me for." Something flickered in Vanessa's expression. Anger, frustration, the mask slipping for just a second. "As you wish," she said coldly. "But remember, Grace, you're hired help, nothing more." She left the table without another word. Grace put Ethan to bed at 7, earlier than usual. She sang his lullaby twice, watching his eyes drift closed. "I love you, Gracie," he murmured sleepily. Her heart cracked. "I love you too, little man. Now sleep. I'll be right here." She positioned herself in the chair by his door. The panic button was in her left hand. A heavy flashlight, the closest thing to a weapon she could find, was in her right. And she waited. Hours crawled by. 9 o'clock. 10. 11. The house fell silent. Staff members went to bed. Lights flickered off one by one. At 11:45, Grace heard it. Footsteps. Soft. Careful. Coming down the hallway toward Ethan's room. She pressed herself against the wall beside the door, flashlight raised. The footsteps stopped outside. The doorknob turned slowly. The door opened. Grace swung. The flashlight connected with something solid. Someone grunted. A body hit the floor. Grace flipped on the light. Derek Webb lay at her feet, clutching his head, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. "Derek!" Grace stepped back, stunned. What are you, how did you get out of jail? Bail?" Derek groaned, struggling to sit up. "I made bail this afternoon. Grace, listen to me. I came to warn you." "Warn me about what?" "Vanessa, she's not working alone. She has someone helping her. A man. I don't know his name, but I've seen him. In the woods behind the property, watching the house." Grace's blood went cold. "What are you talking about?" "The night before the snake attack, I saw them together. Vanessa and this man talking by the back fence. She gave him money, a lot of money." Derek's voice was desperate. "Grace, I didn't steal anything. I've been trying to figure out what's going on. That's why I kept going to the garden shed. I found a burner phone hidden there. It has messages about Ethan, about making something look like an accident." Grace's mind raced. "Where's the phone now?" "I hid it, behind the loose board in the back fence. I was going to show Richard, but then the police came and a crash from downstairs. Glass breaking, someone shouting." Grace grabbed Ethan from his bed. The boy woke, crying, confused. "Derek, take him. Get him out of the house, now." "But what about you? I'll slow them down. Go." She shoved Ethan into Derek's arms and pressed the panic button. 3 seconds. That's all it took. Help was coming, but she might not have 3 minutes. Grace ran toward the stairs, toward the sounds of chaos below, toward whatever nightmare was unfolding in the darkness of the Thompson mansion. At the bottom of the stairs, she found Lucas, the gardener, standing in the foyer. His face was twisted with rage. In his hand was a crowbar. "Where's the boy?" he demanded. "Gone. Police are on their way. You should run while you can. Lucas laughed. A cold, ugly sound. You think I'm scared of police? I've been in worse places than jail. He stepped closer, crowbar raised. Vanessa said you'd be a problem. Should have listened to her from the start. Vanessa's using you. Whatever she promised you, you'll never see it. She doesn't share. Shut up. Lucas swung the crowbar. Grace dodged. The metal slammed into the banister, splintering wood. She grabbed a vase from the entry table and hurled it at his head. He ducked, but the distraction gave her time to run, through the kitchen, past the dining room, toward the back door. Lucas was behind her, gaining. She could hear sirens now, getting closer, but not close enough. The back door was locked. She fumbled with the deadbolt, her hands slick with sweat. Lucas grabbed her shoulder, spun her around. The crowbar rose, and Vanessa's voice cut through the darkness. Stop! Lucas froze. Vanessa stood in the kitchen doorway, silhouetted against the dim light. She was wearing all black. Her face was calm, expressionless. The police are almost here, she said. We need to adjust the plan. Adjust? Lucas lowered the crowbar slightly. The kid got away. This is a disaster. No, this is an opportunity. Vanessa walked toward them slowly, her heels clicking on the tile. Grace attacked you. You were defending yourself. I tried to stop her, but she was out of control, hysterical, dangerous. Grace understood immediately. You're going to frame me. You catch on quickly. I'll admit I underestimated you. A cleaning lady with reflexes like a soldier. Who would have guessed? Vanessa stopped inches away, her eyes cold and dead. But it doesn't matter now. When the police arrive, they'll find an unstable woman who attacked an innocent employee, who made wild accusations against Richard's loving fiancée, who was clearly unfit to care for a child. They won't believe you. They'll believe the evidence. The evidence I've been planting for weeks. The evidence that paints you as a paranoid, obsessive woman who became dangerously attached to her employer's son. Vanessa smiled. Did you think I didn't notice you searching the grounds? Photographing the fence, having whispered conversations with Margaret. The sirens were louder now, almost at the property. It's over, Vanessa, Grace said. Richard knows everything. He has cameras, hidden cameras you don't know about. Everything you've done tonight is recorded. Something flickered in Vanessa's eyes. The first crack in her perfect composure. You're lying. Am I? Grace heard tires crunching on gravel, doors slamming, voices shouting. He's been watching everything. He's 3 blocks away right now, seeing every move you make. Vanessa's mask shattered. You stupid little cleaning woman, she hissed. Do you know what you've done? Do you know what you've ruined? I saved a little boy's life. That's what I've done. The back door burst open. Police flooded in, weapons drawn. Lucas dropped the crowbar and raised his hands. Vanessa tried to run, made it 3 steps before an officer tackled her to the ground. Get off me. Do you know who I am? I'll have your badge. I'll have all your badges. Grace leaned against the kitchen counter, her legs suddenly weak. It was over. It was finally over. But then Vanessa's voice cut through the chaos, venomous, desperate. You think you've won? You haven't won anything. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Charlotte didn't die in childbirth. I made sure of that. And I'll make sure of you too, even from prison, even from the grave. I'll destroy everything you love. The words hit Grace like a physical blow. Charlotte, Ethan's mother. The woman everyone said died from complications during childbirth. Vanessa was saying she'd killed her. That Charlotte's death wasn't an accident. That it was murder. The police dragged Vanessa away, still screaming threats. Lucas was led out behind her, silent and sullen. Grace stood alone in the ruined kitchen, Vanessa's words echoing in her mind. Charlotte didn't die in childbirth. I made sure of that. If that was true, then Vanessa hadn't just been trying to kill Ethan for money. She'd been eliminating witnesses, tying up loose ends, making sure no one could ever connect her to a crime committed 3 years ago. Grace pulled out her phone and called Richard. He answered on the first ring. Grace, are you okay? I saw everything on the cameras. The police should be there by now. They are. Vanessa and Lucas are in custody. Derek got Ethan out safely. Oh, thank God, thank God. Richard. Grace's voice was steady despite her racing heart. Vanessa said something before they took her away, about Charlotte. Silence on the other end. She said Charlotte didn't die in childbirth. She said she made sure of that. The silence stretched longer. Richard. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I need to come home. Right now. Don't let anyone leave. Don't let the police leave. I'm coming home. 20 minutes later, Richard walked through his front door. Grace had never seen a man look so broken, so destroyed. His face was gray. His hands trembled. He looked like someone who'd just been told everything he believed was a lie, because it was. He went straight to the police, told them what Vanessa had said, demanded they investigate Charlotte's death as a potential homicide. The detective's face grew increasingly grim as Richard spoke. "We'll need to reopen the case," the detective said finally. "Exhume the body if necessary. This is a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation, it's a confession, and I want to know the truth." Grace stood in the corner of the room watching Richard crack apart piece by piece, watching a man realize that the woman he'd loved, the woman he'd trusted with his son, had murdered his wife. At 3 a.m., the last police car left. The house fell silent. Richard sat alone in his office staring at a photo of Charlotte. His hands shook as he traced her face. Grace knocked softly on the open door. "I brought you some coffee." He didn't look up. "She was my whole world, you know, Charlotte. When she died, I thought I'd die too. The only thing that kept me going was Ethan." His voice broke. "And now I find out she was murdered. By someone I trusted. Someone I was about to marry." Grace set the coffee on his desk. "You couldn't have known." Shouldn't I have seen something, some sign that Vanessa was a monster? Monsters are good at hiding. That's what makes them dangerous." Richard finally looked at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, devastated. "How did you know?" he asked. "How did you see what I couldn't?" Grace thought about her father, about the years spent surrounded by dangerous creatures learning to read the subtle signs of threat. The tension in a body preparing to strike. The flatness in eyes that had gone cold. "I grew up watching predators," she said quietly. "I learned to recognize them, even when they wear human skin." Richard nodded slowly. "Ethan, where is he?" "With Derek, in the guest house, sleeping. He doesn't understand what happened tonight, but he's safe." "Thank God for that." Richard closed his eyes. "Thank God for you, Grace. If you hadn't been here, if you hadn't seen what was happening, but I was here, and he's safe. That's what matters." A long silence fell between them. "What happens now?" Grace asked. "Now." Richard opened his eyes. "Now we find out the truth about Charlotte. We make sure Vanessa never hurts anyone again. And we rebuild." He looked at the photo one more time. "My son lost his mother when he was born. I'll be damned if he loses anything else because of that woman." Grace nodded and turned to leave, but Richard's voice stopped her. "Grace, that night in the kitchen, when Lucas had the crowbar, when Vanessa was about to frame you for everything." He paused. "You could have run. You could have grabbed Ethan and disappeared, but you stayed. You faced them. I couldn't leave you to face them alone. Why not?" Grace thought about the question. Thought about a little boy who called her Gracie. About a father who'd given his life to save helpless creatures. About the promise she'd made in the darkness of her small room. "Because some things are worth fighting for," she said. "Even when the odds are against you, even when you're scared, some things are just worth it." Richard's eyes glistened. "You remind me of Charlotte. She would have liked you." "I would have liked her too." Grace left him alone with his grief, but as she walked through the dark hallways of the mansion, she felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Hope. The worst had happened. The monster had been unmasked, and somehow, against all odds, they'd survived. But as she passed Ethan's empty room, Vanessa's words echoed in her mind one last time. Even from prison, even from the grave. "I'll destroy everything you love." Grace stopped, turned back, looked at the window where someone had climbed to reach a sleeping child. Vanessa was in custody. Lucas was in custody. But there had been a man in the woods. A man Derek had seen meeting with Vanessa. A man who'd left tire tracks by the back fence. A man who was still out there. Grace pulled out her phone and called Derek. "Is Ethan still with you?" "Yeah, he's sleeping. Why?" "Don't open the door for anyone. Not anyone. I don't care if they say they're police, they're staff, they're Richard himself. You keep that boy safe until morning. Do you understand?" "Grace, what's going on? I thought it was over." "So did I." Grace stared into the darkness outside the window. "But I think we missed someone." The night wasn't over yet, and somewhere out there, hidden in shadows, she couldn't see someone was watching. Someone who wasn't finished. Someone who had unfinished business with the Thompson family. And Grace Carter, the cleaning lady who wasn't a cleaning lady at all, was standing. Grace didn't sleep that night. She sat in the darkness of the guest house living room, watching the door, listening for any sound that didn't belong. Derek dozed in a chair across from her, exhaustion finally winning over fear. Ethan slept peacefully in the bedroom, unaware that his world had nearly shattered around him. At 5:47 a.m., her phone buzzed. "Richard, the police found something. You need to come to the main house, now." Grace woke Derek with a gentle shake. "Stay with Ethan. Don't open that door for anyone until I come back." "What's happening?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." She crossed the grounds in the gray pre-dawn light, her breath misting in the cold October air. The mansion loomed ahead, its windows dark except for the study where Richard waited. Inside, Detective Morrison stood with Richard, both men looking like they hadn't slept in days. A laptop sat open on Richard's desk, its screen glowing. "What did you find?" Grace asked. Detective Morrison turned the laptop toward her. "We recovered data from the burner phone Derek mentioned, the one hidden behind the fence." Grace leaned in. Text messages, dozens of them, between two numbers marked only as V and M. "V is Vanessa," Morrison said. "We confirmed that an hour ago, but, we don't know who M is yet." Grace scrolled through the messages, her blood growing colder with each one. V. "The boy needs to be gone before the wedding. I don't care how." M. "Snake didn't work. The cleaning woman interfered." V. "Then we try something else, something that can't be stopped." M. "What about the husband, V? After the boy, Richard needs to suffer first. He needs to understand what it feels like to lose everything." Grace looked up at Richard. His face was stone, but his eyes betrayed an agony that went beyond words. "There's more," Morrison said grimly. "Keep reading." Grace scrolled further. M. "Charlotte almost figured it out. She was getting suspicious." V. "I handled Charlotte. I can handle this too." M. "What did you do, V? What needed to be done? The midwife was easy to pay off. Wrong medication at the wrong time. Everyone thinks childbirth is dangerous. Nobody questions a tragedy." Grace's hands trembled. She looked at Richard. He was crying. Silently. Tears streaming down his face as he read the words that confirmed his worst nightmare. His wife hadn't died from complications. She'd been murdered. By her best friend. While giving birth to their son. "We're reopening Charlotte's case as a homicide investigation," Morrison said quietly. "We've already issued warrants for the midwife's records. If what these messages say is true, Vanessa Sinclair will face murder charges on top of everything else." Richard said nothing. He just stared at the screen, his world crumbling one word at a time. "There's still the question of M," Grace said. "Who is he, and where is he now?" "That's why I called you here." Morrison pulled up another file. "We traced the burner phone's purchase to a store in Hartford, paid cash, but the store has security cameras." The image was grainy but clear enough. A man in his 30s. Muscular build, dark hair, a scar running from his left temple to his jaw. "Do you recognize him?" Morrison asked. Grace studied the face. Something about it nagged at her. Something familiar that she couldn't quite place. "No," she said finally. "But I feel like I should." "We're running facial recognition now. Hopefully we'll have an ID within the hour." Richard finally spoke. His voice was hollow, empty. "Find him. Whatever it takes. Find him and bring him to me." "Mr. Thompson, I understand your anger, but 3 years, Richard's voice cracked. "For 3 years I thought my wife died because of some tragic accident. I grieved. I blamed myself. I wondered what I could have done differently." He looked at Morrison with eyes that burned. "And now I find out she was murdered. By someone I trusted. So yes, detective, find him. Find everyone involved in this. Because I want to look them in the eye and ask them why. Why my wife? Why my son? Why destroy everything I love?" The room fell silent. Grace reached out and touched Richard's arm, a small gesture. Human connection in the midst of inhuman cruelty. "We'll find him," she said. "I promise." At 7:23 a.m., facial recognition got a hit. Marcus Webb, 41 years old, criminal record for assault, fraud, and weapons charges. Released from federal prison 6 months ago. Webb. Grace's blood went cold. "Derek's last name is Webb," she said. Morrison nodded grimly. "Marcus is Derek's older brother." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Derek, the man who'd been framed. The man who'd tried to warn Grace about the danger. The man who was right now sitting in the guest house with Ethan. His brother was the accomplice. Grace was already running before Morrison finished speaking. Across the grounds, through the morning mist, her lungs burning, her heart pounding. She burst through the guest house door to find Derek exactly where she'd left him, sitting in the chair, watching the bedroom door. "Grace, what's wrong?" "Your brother," she gasped. "Marcus, he's the one working with Vanessa." Derek's face went white. "What?" "The man in the woods, the one you saw meeting with Vanessa. It's your brother Derek." "No." Derek shook his head violently. "No, that's impossible. Marcus and I haven't spoken in years. He's been in prison. His voice broke. "He wouldn't do this. Not to a child. He has issues, but he's not a monster. He was released 6 months ago, right around the time someone started planning to kill Ethan." Derek collapsed into the chair, his head in his hands. "Oh God, oh my God." "Derek, listen to me. Do you know where Marcus might be? Where he might hide?" "I don't. We haven't talked since..." Derek's voice trailed off. His face changed, something dawning behind his eyes. "Wait, there's a cabin. Our grandfather's place. In the woods about 20 miles north of here. Marcus used to go there when things got bad, when he needed to disappear. Could he be there now? Maybe, probably. It's the only place he ever felt safe." Grace called Morrison, gave him the location. Within minutes, a tactical team was being assembled, but something was still bothering her, a detail that didn't add up. "Derek," she said slowly, "the night Lucas attacked me, how did you know to come to the house you'd just gotten out on bail? How did you know something was happening?" Derek looked up. His eyes were red, devastated. "Anonymous text," he said. "Told me that Ethan was in danger, that I needed to get to the mansion right away. I thought it was you or Richard. It wasn't me." "Then who?" The answer hit them both at the same time. Marcus. Marcus had sent the text. Marcus had wanted Derek at the mansion that night. "But why? He was setting you up," Grace said. "Again. If the police had arrived and found you there at the scene right after getting out of jail, they would have arrested you immediately, assumed you were part of it, the perfect fall guy." Derek's face crumpled. "My own brother. He was using me to cover his tracks." Grace felt a wave of sympathy for the man in front of her. He'd been betrayed by everyone. His employer's fiancé, his own flesh and blood, used as a pawn in a game he didn't even know was being played. "I'm sorry, Derek." "Don't be sorry." His voice hardened. "Just find him. Find my brother and make him pay for what he's done." At 9:15 a.m., the tactical team hit the cabin. Grace waited at the mansion with Richard watching the phone for updates. Ethan was with them now, playing on the floor, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding around him. The call came at 9:47. "Cabin's empty," Morrison reported. "But we found evidence, weapons, surveillance photos of the Thompson estate, and something else."
"Also, what?"
"Photos of you, Ms. Carter. Dozens of them. Following you to work. Watching you in the garden. Close-ups of your face." Grace's stomach turned. "He's been stalking me." "It looks that way. There are also detailed notes about your routine, your habits, when you wake up, when you go to bed. He's been studying you for weeks." "Why me?" "That's what we need to figure out. Stay where you are. I'm sending additional units to the mansion." Grace hung up and looked at Richard. His face was grim. "He's fixated on you," Richard said. "First Vanessa targets you. Now her accomplice is obsessed with you. Why?" Grace didn't have an answer, but a sick feeling was growing in her gut. A feeling that there was a connection she wasn't seeing. A piece of the puzzle still hidden in shadows. She looked at Ethan happily stacking blocks on the carpet. "Whatever the reason," she said, "he's still out there, and he's not going to stop until he finishes what he started." At 11:32 a.m., Derek's phone rang. They were in Richard's study going over security plans when the device buzzed on the desk. Derek looked at the screen. His face went pale. "It's him? It's Marcus." Grace grabbed the phone before Derek could answer. "Put it on speaker." Derek's hands shook as he pressed the button. "Hello. Little brother." Marcus's voice was calm, controlled, the voice of a man who believed he was in complete command. "I hear you've been talking to the police. That wasn't smart." "Marcus, what the hell are you doing? What have you done? What I've always done, surviving, taking what I need from a world that never gave me anything." A pause. "Where are you right now, Derek? At the mansion?" Derek looked at Grace. She shook her head sharply. "I'm at home," Derek lied. "My apartment." "No, you're not. I can see the Thompson mansion from where I'm standing, and I can see you through the study window." Everyone in the room froze. "That's right," Marcus continued. "I've been watching all morning. I saw the police leave. I saw the little boy playing in the garden earlier. Such a sweet child. It would be a shame if something happened to him." Richard lunged for the phone. "You touch my son and I'll kill you myself." "Ah, Mr. Thompson, I was wondering when you'd join the conversation. How does it feel knowing your wife died because your fiancé wanted your money? How does it feel knowing you were too blind to see the snake sleeping next to you every night? What do you want?" "What I've always wanted. Money, freedom, a fresh start somewhere far away from this pathetic country." Marcus's voice sharpened. $5 million. Cash. By midnight tonight, or I finish what Vanessa started. "That's impossible. I can't get that much cash in that time frame." "Then I suggest you get creative, Mr. Thompson, because the clock's ticking." "Wait," Richard started. The line went dead. Silence filled the room. Then chaos. Richard was on his phone immediately calling his bank, his lawyers, his accountants. Derek paced like a caged animal, guilt and rage warring on his face. Grace stood at the window looking out at the grounds. He was out there, watching, right now, close enough to see inside. But where? She scanned the tree line, the distant hills, the winding road that led to the estate. Nothing. No movement. No sign of a human presence. But he was there. She could feel it, like an itch between her shoulder blades, like the instinct that had saved Ethan's life that first day in the garden. "We need to get Ethan out of here," she said. "Somewhere Marcus can't find him." "Where?" Richard asked. "Marcus knows this area. He's been watching for weeks, wherever we take him. Then we don't take him anywhere he'd expect." Grace turned from the window. "Does your family own any other properties somewhere remote, somewhere Marcus wouldn't know about?" Richard thought for a moment. "My mother's house, in Vermont. It's been empty since she passed, but it's still furnished. Still has utilities." "Has Vanessa ever been there?" "No, never. Charlotte didn't even like going there. Too isolated." "Perfect. We leave tonight, before Marcus's deadline. We take Ethan and disappear. Let the police handle Marcus. And if they can't find him..." Grace met his eyes. "Then I will." At 2:15 p.m. they started preparing. Grace packed essentials for Ethan, clothes, toys, the stuffed rabbit he couldn't sleep without. She moved through his room methodically, trying not to think about the fact that someone might be watching her through the window even now. Derek appeared in the doorway. "The police want to set up a trace on Marcus's phone, in case he calls again." "Good." "Grace?" Derek stepped into the room. His voice was strained. "I need to ask you something." "What?" "My brother. He's always been troubled. Our father was abusive. Marcus took the worst of it protecting me. When Dad finally went to prison, Marcus was already broken. He couldn't hold a job, couldn't maintain relationships, just kept getting into worse and worse trouble." Derek's eyes glistened. "I'm not making excuses. What he's done is unforgivable, but he wasn't always like this. He used to be my hero." Grace stopped packing. "What's your question, Derek?" "When they find him, when the police corner him..." Derek swallowed hard. "He's not going to surrender. He'd rather die than go back to prison. I know him. He'll force their hand." "You're asking if there's a way to take him alive." "I'm asking if anyone will even try." Grace thought about her father, about the mercy he'd shown to every wounded creature no matter how dangerous, about the nights he'd stayed up nursing snakes that could have killed him with a single bite. "I can't promise anything," she said honestly, "but if there's a chance to bring him in alive, I'll push for it." Derek nodded. "That's all I can ask." At 4:48 p.m., Marcus called again. Grace answered this time. "What do you want?" "Ah, the famous Grace Carter, the cleaning lady who caught a rattlesnake with her bare hands. I have to admit, you've impressed me." "I'm not interested in your admiration." "No? Then maybe you'll be interested in this. I know who you really are, Grace. I know why you left Georgia. I know about your father and the fire and the guilt you've been carrying for 5 years. Grace's heart stopped. "How do you know about that?" "Vanessa had you investigated, very thoroughly. Did you know there was a witness to that fire? Someone who saw you standing outside while your father burned?" The words hit like bullets. Grace felt the room spinning. "That's not what happened." "Isn't it?" "The report says you were held back, that you tried to go in after him, but witnesses can be unreliable, memories can be shaped." Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. "What if I told you that witness is willing to change their story to say that you didn't try to save your father, that you just stood there and watched him die?" Why would anyone believe that people believe what they're told, Grace? And right now, I'm telling you that your reputation, your freedom, your entire life can disappear with a single phone call, unless you do exactly what I say. Grace gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles went white. "What do you want?" "I want you to bring Ethan to me, tonight, alone, no police, no Richard, just you and the boy." "Absolutely not." "Then I destroy you, and I still find a way to get to Ethan eventually. Either way, the boy dies. The only question is whether you go down with him." The line went dead. Grace stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. Richard was at her side instantly. "What did he say? What does he want?" "Me." Grace's voice was steady despite the storm inside her. "He wants me to bring Ethan to him. Alone." "That's insane. You're not actually considering." "No, but now we know something we didn't know before." "What?" "He's scared. He's changing his demands because the original plan failed. That means he's improvising, and people who improvise make mistakes." Grace looked at Richard. "We need to force another mistake, something big enough to draw him out." "How?" Grace was quiet for a moment, thinking, planning. Then, "We give him what he wants, or at least we make him think we are." At 6:30 p.m., Grace walked out of the mansion alone. It was a calculated risk, a trap within a trap. Richard and the police were watching from hidden positions, ready to move at a moment's notice. Derek was safely inside, with Ethan every door locked, every window secured. Grace walked across the grounds toward the back fence, toward the woods where Marcus was hiding. She carried nothing. No weapon, no phone. Just herself and the knowledge that somewhere in those trees a killer was watching. "Marcus," she called out, "I know you can hear me. I know you're watching." Silence. The wind rustled through dying leaves. "You want to talk? Let's talk. Just you and me. No police, no tricks. I'm alone." A branch snapped somewhere to her left. Then his voice closer than she'd expected. "You're either very brave or very stupid." Grace turned. Marcus Webb emerged from the tree line, a gun in his hand. The scar on his face was vivid in the fading light. "Both probably," she said. "Where's the boy?" "Safe, and he stays safe unless you want to negotiate." Marcus laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Negotiate? You think I'm interested in negotiation?" "I think you're interested in survival, and right now, your best chance of getting out of this alive is standing right in front of you." Something flickered in his eyes. Curiosity, maybe a hint of respect. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. Most people would be on their knees begging by now." "I'm not most people." "No." Marcus circled her slowly, the gun never wavering. "You're not. Vanessa underestimated you. She thought you were just another minimum wage nobody, but I saw what you did with that snake. That wasn't luck. That was training." "My father taught me." "Your father?" Marcus stopped circling. "The hero who died saving animals. That's what the reports say. But I've seen the full file, Grace. I know about the investigation afterward, the questions about how the fire started, the suspicions that it wasn't electrical failure after all." Grace felt ice in her veins. "What are you talking about?" "Insurance fraud. That's what the investigators thought. Your father's sanctuary was broke. Drowning in debt, and then conveniently there's a fire. Everything destroyed, a tragic death, and a big insurance payout. My father didn't start that fire." "Maybe, maybe not. But you know what I think?" Marcus leaned in close. "I think you've been running from that question for 5 years. I think the guilt you carry isn't just about failing to save him. I think it's about wondering if he wanted to die, if he started that fire himself and just couldn't go through with escaping." The words hit like physical blows. Grace felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Then why does the doubt in your eyes look so familiar?" Because it was familiar. Because in her darkest moments in the nightmares that jolted her awake at 3 a.m., that same question had haunted her. What if her father had started the fire? What if his death wasn't an accident but a final escape from a life that had become too heavy to carry? She'd buried that doubt so deep she'd almost forgotten it existed, and now this monster was dragging it into the light. "It doesn't matter," Grace said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Whatever happened 5 years ago doesn't change what's happening now. You're surrounded, Marcus. The police are closing in. Your only chance is to surrender." "Surrender?" Marcus laughed again. "I told Derek I'd rather die than go back to prison. I meant it." "Then you'll die. Is that really what you want?" "What I want is to burn this whole corrupt world to the ground, starting with Richard Thompson and his perfect little family." Marcus raised the gun. "But first, I'll start with you." Grace saw his finger tighten on the trigger, and then everything happened at once. A shot rang out from behind her. Marcus jerked sideways, blood blooming on his shoulder. His gun fired wild, the bullet whizzing past Grace's ear. Police swarmed from the trees, shouting. Weapons drawn. Marcus turned and ran, disappearing into the darkening woods. Grace sprinted after him. She could hear the officers behind her crashing through the underbrush, could hear their shouts to stop, to let them handle it, but something primal had taken over. The same instinct that had made her grab that snake, the same force that had driven her father into a burning building. Some things you couldn't run from. She found him at the edge of a ravine. Marcus stood with his back to the drop gun in his blood-soaked hand, his face contorted with pain and rage. Stop! Grace skidded to a halt. Marcus, it's over. Don't do this. It's never over. He raised the gun, but not at her, at his own head. It never ends. The pain, the rage, the voice in my head telling me I'm worthless, that I've always been worthless. That's not true. You don't know anything about me. I know your brother. Grace stepped closer, hands raised. I know Derek. He told me about your father, about the abuse, about how you protected him when no one else would. Something changed in Marcus's eyes. A flicker of the person he might have been buried under years of damage. Derek was supposed to be better than me, Marcus said, his voice cracking. He was supposed to escape, have a normal life, and I was going to help him. Use the money from this job to set him up, make sure he never had to struggle again. By killing a 2-year-old child. By doing what needed to be done. Marcus's hand shook. You think I wanted this? You think I chose to become a monster? Life makes you what you are, Grace. It takes whatever goodness you had and twists it until you can't recognize yourself anymore. Then let it end differently. Put down the gun. Face what you've done. Maybe it's not too late for redemption. Redemption. The word was a bitter laugh. There's no redemption for people like me. There was for my father. Marcus paused. The gun wavered. He made mistakes, too. Grace continued the words coming from somewhere deep inside her. He struggled with depression for years. There were days he couldn't get out of bed, days he told me he didn't see the point of going on. Her voice broke. But he kept fighting. He found purpose in helping creatures that couldn't help themselves. And in the end, he died a hero. Not because he was perfect, but because he chose to be better than his pain. Your father had something to live for. I have nothing. You have Derek. He still loves you, Marcus, despite everything. He asked me to try to bring you in alive. For a long moment, Marcus was silent. The gun trembled in his grip. Then slowly he lowered his arm. Tell my brother I'm sorry, he said quietly. Tell him I should have been stronger. He tossed the gun to the ground and dropped to his knees, hands behind his head. The police swarmed in seconds later, cuffed him, led him away. Grace stood at the edge of the ravine watching them go, her heart pounding her legs, barely holding her up. It was over. Finally, truly over. But as she turned back toward the mansion, Marcus's words echoed in her mind. The investigation afterward. The questions about how the fire started. The suspicions that it was an electrical failure after all. She'd spent 5 years running from Georgia. Running from grief. Running from the memories of that terrible night. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to find out the truth about her father's death. At 9:47 p.m., Grace sat in Richard's study with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Ethan was asleep upstairs, safe in his bed, guarded by 2 police officers. Derek had gone with his brother to the hospital, torn between hate and love, unable to abandon family even now. Richard sat across from her, exhausted but determined. It's over, he said. Vanessa's in custody. Lucas is cooperating. Marcus is going to prison for the rest of his life. My son's safe. Yes, but you don't look happy. Grace stared into her cold coffee. Something Marcus said. About my father? About the fire? What about it? He implied there was more to the story, that the investigation raised questions I didn't know about. She looked up at Richard. I need to find out if he was telling the truth. You're going back to Georgia. I have to. I've spent 5 years believing I failed to save my father, but what if that's not the whole story? What if there's something I missed? Richard nodded slowly. I understand. Family, truth, they matter. He paused. But Grace, whatever you find, whatever the truth turns out to be, it doesn't change what you did here. You saved my son's life. You saved my life. Nothing in your past can take that away. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. No, thank you. Richard stood and walked to the window. Charlotte would have wanted you here. I see it now. The same courage, The same stubbornness, the same absolute refusal to give up on people. He turned back to her. When you come back from Georgia, there's a place for you here. A real place. As part of this family. You barely know me. I know enough. Richard smiled for the first time in days. I know that when danger came, you didn't run. I know that when a child needed protecting, you put yourself in harm's way. I know that when a killer pointed a gun at you, you tried to save his life. His voice softened. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. Grace didn't have words. For 5 years, she'd been invisible, a ghost drifting through life, asking nothing, expecting nothing. Now suddenly she had a place, a purpose, a family that wanted her. It felt terrifying. It felt like hope. At 11:30 p.m., Grace stood at Ethan's bedside. The little boy slept peacefully, one arm wrapped around his stuffed rabbit, his face soft and innocent in the dim light. Hey, little man, Grace whispered. I have to go away for a while, but I'll be back, I promise. Ethan stirred. His eyes fluttered open. Gracie. I'm here, sweetheart. Go back to sleep. Don't go. His small hand found hers. Stay. Grace felt her heart crack. I'll come back. I swear it. Promise. I promise. Ethan's eyes closed. Within seconds, he was asleep again, his tiny fingers still wrapped around her stomach. Grace stayed there for a long time, watching him breathe. It's memorizing the face of the child she'd grown to love like her own. Then she gently freed her hand, pressed a kiss to his forehead, and walked out into the dark hallway. Tomorrow she would fly to Georgia. Tomorrow she would finally face the truth about her father's death. Tomorrow everything might change. But tonight, in this moment, all that mattered was a sleeping child and the promise she'd made to keep him safe. Whatever came next, she would honor that promise. Whatever truth waited in Georgia, she would face it head on. And whatever darkness tried to drag her down, she would fight her way back to the light. Because that's what her father had taught her. That's what Ethan had shown her. That's who Grace Carter really was. A survivor, a protector, a woman who refused to give up, no matter what. The plane touched down in Atlanta at 6:47 a.m. Grace hadn't slept during the flight, couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus's face, heard his words, the investigation afterward, the questions about how the fire started. 5 years she'd avoided this place. 5 years she'd told herself the past was buried, that moving forward was the only way to survive. Now she was back, and the past was waiting. She rented a car at the airport and drove south. 2 hours through countryside that grew more familiar with every mile. The red clay dirt, the pine forests, the small towns with their white steepled churches and rusted pickup trucks. Home, or what used to be home. At 9:15 a.m., she pulled into the parking lot of the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. The building looked exactly as she remembered. Brown brick, American flag hanging limp in the humid air. A place where nothing ever changed and nothing was ever forgotten. She walked inside and asked to speak with whoever had handled the Carter Wildlife Sanctuary fire investigation. The deputy at the front desk looked at her for a long moment. That case was 5 years ago, ma'am. Detective Harrison retired last year. Is there anyone else? Anyone who worked that case? The deputy hesitated, then picked up his phone. Let me see if Sheriff Mitchell has a minute. 10 minutes later, Grace sat across from a man she'd known her entire life. Bill Mitchell had been her father's best friend for 30 years. They'd gone to high school together, stood as best man at each other's weddings, raised their children side by side. When Grace was 8 years old, Bill had taught her to fish in the creek behind his house. When she was 16, he'd threatened to arrest any boy who broke her heart. When her father died, Bill had held her while she screamed. Now he sat behind his sheriff's desk, looking at her with eyes that held too many secrets. Grace. His voice was rough. I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again. Neither was I. What brings you back? The truth. Grace leaned forward. Someone told me there were questions about the fire, about how it started. I need to know if that's true. Bill's face changed. Something shuddered behind his eyes. Who told you that how? Does it matter? It might? A man named Marcus Webb. He was working with someone who had me investigated. They dug up everything they could find about my past. Bill was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and closed his office door. Grace, what I'm about to tell you. I've been carrying it for 5 years. I wanted to tell you back then. But you were so broken. So lost. I couldn't add more weight to what you were already carrying. Grace's heart began to pound. Tell me now. Bill returned to his desk, opened a drawer, pulled out a thick folder that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The official report says electrical failure, he said. That's what we released to the public. That's what the insurance company accepted. That's what everyone believes. But that's not the whole story. Bill opened the folder. The fire investigator found evidence of accelerant near the main building's electrical panel. Someone had spread kerosene, made it look like the wiring sparked and caught. Grace felt the room tilt. Someone started the fire deliberately. That's what the evidence suggested. Then why wasn't it ruled arson? Why wasn't there an investigation? Bill's face was pained. Because of where the accelerant was found, and because of what else we discovered. What did you discover? Grace. Bill hesitated. The kerosene came from a can in your father's supply shed. It had his fingerprints on it. Only his fingerprints. The words didn't make sense. They bounced around Grace's skull like stones in an empty can. You're saying my father started the fire. I'm saying that's what the evidence pointed to. James's fingerprints on the accelerant. James's access to the building. James's... Bill stopped. James's what? His state of mind, Grace. In the weeks before the fire, people noticed changes. He was withdrawn, stopped coming to town, missed payments he'd never missed before. Bill's voice dropped. And then there was the letter. Grace's blood went cold. What letter? Bill reached into the folder and pulled out a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a single sheet of paper yellowed with age covered in handwriting she would recognize anywhere. Her father's handwriting. We found this in his desk drawer after the fire. It was addressed to you. Grace took the bag with trembling hands, read the words through the plastic. My dearest Gracie, if you're reading this, then I've done something I can never take back. The sanctuary is dying. The debts have become too much. Every day I watch the work of my life crumble a little more and I can't bear it anymore. I want you to know that none of this is your fault. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, the joy of my life, the reason I kept fighting as long as I did. But some fights can't be won, and some men aren't strong enough to keep losing. Please forgive me. Please remember me as I was not as I became. I love you more than words can say. Dad. The letter fell from Grace's nerveless fingers. The room was spinning. The floor was tilting. She couldn't breathe. No, she whispered. No, this isn't real. He wouldn't do this. He wouldn't leave me. Grace? He ran into that building to save the animals. I saw him. I watched him go cage to cage, releasing them, making sure they got out safely. And then he stayed inside. Bill's voice was gentle but firm. He got the animals out, Grace. All of them. And then he stayed in the building while it burned. Because he was trapped. Because the fire spread too fast. The fire investigator said there were multiple exit points. James knew that building better than anyone. If he'd wanted to get out, he could have. Grace was shaking now, her whole body trembling. You're telling me my father committed suicide, that he killed himself and made it look like an accident? I'm telling you that's what the evidence suggested. But Grace, I need you to understand something. Bill came around the desk and knelt beside her. James loved you more than anything in this world. Whatever demons he was fighting, whatever darkness drove him to that night, his last act was making sure those animals survived. He died saving lives. That's not the act of a man who gave up on everything. That's the act of a man who wanted to go out doing something that mattered. Grace couldn't speak, couldn't think. 5 years of grief, 5 years of guilt, 5 years of believing she'd failed to save her father, and now this. The truth was worse than she'd ever imagined. And somehow, impossibly, it was also better, because her father hadn't abandoned her. He'd been fighting a battle she never knew about, carrying a weight she never saw, and in the end, he'd chosen to be a hero. At 11:32 a.m., Grace stood at the gates of what used to be the Carter Wildlife Sanctuary. The land had been sold after the fire. Insurance money had paid off the debts. Whatever was left had gone into a trust fund that Grace had never touched. Now a housing development sat where the animal enclosures used to be. Neat rows of identical houses where wolves once howled and eagles once healed. Grace walked to the spot where the main building had stood. Now it was someone's front lawn. A child's bicycle lay on its side near the sidewalk. She stood there for a long time, remembering, her father teaching her to hold a snake for the first time, the fear in her small hands, his steady voice. Respect them, Gracie. Understand them. Fear makes you dangerous. Knowledge makes you safe. Her father staying up all night with a wounded owl, feeding it by hand, singing softly to keep it calm. Her father crying when they had to put down a bear that couldn't be saved. Her father laughing at her terrible jokes. Her father holding her when she had nightmares. Her father. "I miss you," she said to the empty air. "I miss you every single day." The wind whispered through the grass. Somewhere a dog barked. Life went on indifferent to grief. At 12:15 p.m., Grace drove to the cemetery. James Carter's grave was simple. A granite headstone, and with his name, his dates, and a single phrase, he gave his life for those who could not speak for themselves. Grace knelt in the grass and pressed her palm against the cool stone. "I found out the truth," she said. "Bill told me everything. About the fire, about the letter." Her voice broke. "Why didn't you tell me you were struggling? Why didn't you let me help?" Silence. Just the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. "I've been so angry at myself for 5 years, thinking I could have saved you if I'd been faster, stronger, braver." Tears streamed down her face. "But you didn't want to be saved, did you? You'd already made your choice." She was crying openly now. The grief she'd held back for 5 years finally breaking free. "I met a little boy, Dad. His name is Ethan. He's 2 years old, and he's got the biggest eyes you've ever seen. Someone tried to hurt him. A lot of someone's, actually. And I stopped them." She managed a watery smile. "I caught a rattlesnake with my bare hands, just like you taught me. You should have seen their faces." The wind picked up. For a moment, it almost felt like an embrace. "I have a family now, Dad. People who care about me. A purpose. Something to fight for." Grace wiped her eyes. "I think you'd be proud of me. I hope you'd be proud of me." She stayed at the grave until the sun started to sink toward the horizon. Then she kissed her fingertips and pressed them against the stone. "I forgive you," she whispered, "and I hope you can forgive me for taking so long to understand." Then she stood and walked back to her car. It was time to go home. At 6:47 p.m., Grace's phone rang. "Richard." "Grace, where are you?" "Still in Georgia. I'm leaving tomorrow morning." "Something's happened. Vanessa's lawyer filed an emergency motion. The judge is considering bail." Grace stopped walking. "What? She's facing murder charges. How is that possible?" "Her family has money, old money, and apparently their lawyers have connections. They're arguing that she's not a flight risk, that she has ties to the community." "That's insane. She tried to kill a child." "I know. The DA is fighting it, but..." Richard's voice was strained. "I need you back here, Grace. Ethan keeps asking for you. He won't sleep. He won't eat. He just keeps crying for Gracie." Grace's heart clenched. "I'll be on the first flight tomorrow." "Thank you, and Grace, did you find what you were looking for in Georgia?" She thought about the letter, about her father's final choice, about the weight he'd carried that she never knew about. "I found the truth," she said. "It wasn't what I expected, but I think it's what I needed." "I'm glad. Hurry home." Home. The word echoed in her mind long after she hung up. Connecticut wasn't where she'd grown up. The Thompson mansion wasn't the house where she'd learned to walk. Ethan wasn't her blood. But somehow, impossibly, it had become home, and she'd do whatever it took to protect it. At 8:15 p.m., Grace sat in her hotel room in Atlanta packing for the early flight. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I know what you found in Georgia. We should talk. Meet me at Rosewood Cemetery, 10 p.m. Come alone. This is about your father, and about who really killed him." Grace stared at the message, her blood running cold. Who really killed him? Bill had said the evidence pointed to suicide. The letter, the fingerprints, the lack of other suspects. But what if he was wrong? What if someone else had been there that night? Grace knew she shouldn't go. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, that she should call the police, call Richard, call someone. But the words, "who really killed him," burned in her mind like fire. She'd spent 5 years not knowing the truth. Now she had a chance to find out. At 9:47 p.m., Grace parked outside Rosewood Cemetery. The gates were closed, but there was a gap in the fence that she remembered from high school. The same gap she and her friends used to sneak through on Halloween dares. She slipped through and walked among the graves, her senses on high alert. At 10:03 p.m., a figure emerged from the shadows. Grace tensed, ready to fight or run. "Relax," a woman's voice said. "I'm not here to hurt you." The figure stepped into the moonlight, and Grace felt her heart stop. She was looking at herself. Or rather, she was looking at a woman who could have been her twin. Same height, same build, same dark skin and high cheekbones. But the woman was older. Mid-50s, maybe. Gray threading through her hair. Lines around her eyes that spoke of years of hard living. Who are you? Grace demanded. The woman smiled. It was a sad smile full of regret. My name is Diana Carter, and I'm your mother. The words didn't make sense. Grace's mother had died when she was 3 years old. A car accident. That's what her father had always told her. That's impossible. My mother is dead. Your father told you I died. He lied. Diana stepped closer. I've been looking for you for years, Grace. Ever since I got out of prison. Prison. 22 years for manslaughter. I was convicted when you were 3. Your father told you I died because he thought it would be easier than explaining why your mother was behind bars. Grace's mind was reeling. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of trick. How do I know you're telling the truth? Diana reached into her pocket and pulled out a photograph. Old, worn, creased from years of handling. It showed a young couple holding a baby. The man was unmistakably James Carter. The woman was Diana, 20 years younger, but still recognizable, and the baby was Grace. I carried this with me every day for 22 years, Diana said. It was the only thing that kept me going, the hope that someday I'd find you again. Grace took the photograph with trembling hands, studied the faces, her father young and happy, her mother radiant with joy, herself tiny and innocent, unaware of the chaos that was about to tear her family apart. Why are you here? Grace asked. Why now? Because I know what happened to your father. I know who really started that fire. Diana's voice hardened. And I need to tell you the truth before anyone else dies. They found a bench in a quiet corner of the cemetery. 2 strangers connected by blood sitting in the darkness, finally facing each other. Your father and I met in college, Diana began. We fell in love, got married, had you. For a few years we were happy. What changed? I changed. After you were born, something went wrong in my head. Postpartum depression, they call it now. Back then, they just called me crazy. Diana's hands clenched in her lap. I started hearing voices, seeing things that weren't there. I became paranoid, convinced that people were trying to hurt you and your father. Grace listened in silence, her heart aching. One night, I attacked a man I thought was breaking into our house. I beat him with a baseball bat, nearly killed him. Diana's voice was barely a whisper. Turns out he was just a neighbor who came to borrow sugar. I didn't see a friendly face. I saw a monster, and I almost committed murder because of it. That's why you went to prison. Yes, aggravated assault causing severe bodily harm. The judge gave me 22 years because of the violence of the attack. Your father filed for divorce, full custody. He told you I was dead because he was afraid of what I might do if I ever got out. Diana wiped her eyes. I don't blame him. I was dangerous back then. I might have hurt you, hurt both of you. But you got treatment in prison? Eventually, it took years, medication, therapy, learning to recognize when the voices weren't real. Diana managed a small smile. I'm better now, not perfect, but better. I'm sorry, Grace said. I'm sorry you went through that. I'm sorry I didn't know. You couldn't have known. Your father did what he thought was best. I can't fault him for that. Diana paused. But Grace, there's something else, something I learned after I got out. Something that changes everything about the night your father died. Grace felt her pulse quicken. What? The fire wasn't suicide, and it wasn't an accident. It was murder. The word hung in the air between them. How do you know that? Because I tracked down the fire investigator, the original one before they changed his findings. He told me there was evidence of a second accelerant, something different from the kerosene, something that was deliberately covered up. Covered up by who? By someone with money, someone with connections, someone who wanted your father dead and his land sold cheap. Diana leaned forward. Grace, your father's sanctuary was sitting on land that's worth millions now. That housing development, it was being planned years before the fire. The developer needed James to sell, but James refused. Over and over he refused. Grace's mind was racing. You're saying someone killed my father for his land? I'm saying someone made it look like suicide to cover their tracks. The letter forged. I've had it analyzed. It's a good forgery, but it's not your father's handwriting. Little details are wrong. Someone studied his writing and recreated it. But Bill Mitchell said the investigation. Bill Mitchell was pressured to close the case quickly. The developer had connections to the county commissioner. Money changed hands. Witnesses were intimidated. Diana's voice was bitter. Justice in small towns is only as good as the people paying for it. Grace sat in stunned silence. Everything she'd believed about her father's death was wrong. Not just the suicide story, everything. Who? She finally asked. Who was the developer? Diana handed her a folder. I've spent 5 years gathering evidence. Names, dates, financial records, it's all here. Grace opened the folder and read the name at the top of the first page. Her blood turned to ice. This is impossible. I know, I couldn't believe it either when I found out. Grace looked at her mother, then back at the documents. The name staring back at her was one she knew well. Richard Thompson. At 11:45 p.m., Grace sat in her rental car outside the cemetery trying to process what she'd just learned. Richard Thompson. The man who had hired her. The man whose son she'd saved. The man who had offered her a place in his family. According to Diana's documents, Richard's company had been the silent backer behind the development that now sat on her father's land. They had used shell corporations to hide their involvement, had paid bribes to local officials, had allegedly hired someone to start the fire that killed James Carter. Everything Grace thought she knew was a lie. But was it Diana had been in prison for 22 years? She admitted to mental illness. She had every reason to hate the man who had raised her daughter without her. What if this was all paranoid fantasy? What if Diana had constructed an elaborate conspiracy theory out of fragments and coincidences? Grace needed proof. Real proof. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. Dr. Patterson. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy with sleep. Grace, it's midnight. What's wrong? I need your help. I need you to find out everything you can about a company called Thompson Development LLC, specifically any connection to land acquisitions in southern Georgia 5 years ago. Thompson, as in the tech billionaire? Yes. A long pause. Grace, what are you into? I don't know yet, but I need answers. Fast. I'll make some calls. Get back to you as soon as I can. Grace hung up and stared at the documents in her lap. If Diana was right, then Richard Thompson was responsible for her father's death, and Grace had been living in his house caring for his son, falling in love with a family built on blood. But if Diana was wrong, then Grace was about to destroy the only good thing that had happened to her in 5 years. Either way, she needed to know the truth. At 6:15 a.m., Grace boarded her flight back to Connecticut. She hadn't slept. Couldn't sleep. Her mind kept spinning through possibilities, scenarios, explanations. Richard as a murderer, Richard as innocent, Diana as a reliable source. Diana as a mentally ill woman seeking revenge on the man who'd taken her daughter. The documents were compelling. But documents could be forged. Evidence could be manufactured. Truth could be whatever you wanted it to be if you were desperate enough to believe it. At 9:47 a.m., the plane touched down in Hartford. Grace turned on her phone and found 3 messages waiting. One from Richard, Ethan can't wait to see you, come straight to the house. One from Dr. Patterson, found something, call me immediately. One from an unknown number, be careful who you trust, not everything is what it seems. She called Dr. Patterson first. Grace. I don't know what you've gotten yourself into, but this is serious. His voice was urgent. Thompson Development LLC was definitely involved in the Georgia land deal. But here's the thing, they divested 2 years before the fire, sold their stake to a local investment group. So Richard's company wasn't connected to the fire. Not directly, but the investment group that bought them out, it was funded by someone who used Thompson Development as a front to hide their involvement. Who? A woman named Victoria Sinclair. Grace nearly dropped the phone. Victoria funded the Georgia development. Through about 6 layers of shell companies, yes. I traced the money back last night. Victoria Sinclair was the real buyer of your father's land. Thompson Development was just a cover. The pieces clicked into place. Victoria, not Richard. Victoria had been behind everything from the beginning. She'd killed Charlotte to get close to Richard. She'd tried to kill Ethan to eliminate the heir. And 5 years ago, she'd arranged to have Grace's father murdered to acquire valuable land. But why? Why would Victoria care about a wildlife sanctuary in rural Georgia unless Victoria had known about Grace long before the Thompson mansion? Unless this whole thing had been planned for years? Dr. Patterson, one more question. Is there any connection between Victoria Sinclair and my mother, Diana Carter? A long pause. Give me an hour. I'll call you back. Grace sat in the airport terminal, her mind reeling. Victoria had killed her father. Victoria had stolen her family's land. And somehow, impossibly, Victoria had ended up engaged to a man who would later hire Grace to care for his son. Coincidence or something far more sinister? At 10:52 a.m., Der Patterson called back. "Grace, you're not going to believe this." "Try me." Diana Carter and Victoria Sinclair went to the same college. They were roommates for 2 years. Best friends, according to the records I found. Grace felt the world tilt. Diana knew Victoria. More than knew her. They were inseparable. Until Diana's breakdown. After Diana was committed, Victoria distanced herself. Never visited, never wrote, acted like Diana didn't exist. But Victoria would have known about Diana's daughter, about me. Almost certainly. And here's where it gets really twisted. Dr. Patterson's voice was grim. Victoria's family lost their fortune in a bad investment when she was 19. She went from old money to no money overnight. She spent years climbing back up, making connections, marrying well, divorcing wealthier. Your father's land was one of her early investments, a way to build her portfolio before moving on to bigger targets. Like Richard Thompson. Like Richard Thompson. Grace closed her eyes, seeing the whole ugly picture at last. Victoria had used Diana's breakdown as an opportunity, had exploited the chaos to acquire land cheaply, had killed James Carter when he refused to sell, and then years later had found her way to Richard Thompson, knowing that Grace might someday appear to threaten her plans. Everything was connected. Everything had been planned. And Grace had walked right into the trap. At 11:30 a.m., Grace arrived at the Thompson mansion. Richard met her at the door, Ethan in his arms. The little boy's face lit up when he saw her. "Gracie, Gracie, home!" He squirmed out of his father's grip and ran toward her. Grace scooped him up and held him tight, feeling his small heart beating against her chest. "I missed you too, little man. Don't go away again. Stay forever." "I'm not going anywhere." Richard watched them with tired eyes. "Thank God you're back. The bail hearing is tomorrow. The DA thinks they might actually let her out." Grace looked at Richard. This man she'd grown to trust. This man she'd started to love in a complicated way she didn't fully understand. Was he innocent, or was he part of Victoria's scheme? "Richard, we need to talk, privately." Something in her voice made him tense. "What's wrong?" "Everything, and I need you to tell me the truth." They went to his study. Grace closed the door. "Did you know about the Georgia land deal?" she asked directly. "Did you know Thompson Development was used as a front company to buy my father's property?" Richard's face went pale. "What? Thompson Development LLC 5 years ago, a land acquisition in southern Georgia. Did you know?" Thompson Development was a subsidiary I barely paid attention to. My CFO handled those investments." Richard's voice was confused. "What does this have to do with anything?" "My father died because of that land deal, Richard. Someone killed him to force the sale, and the trail leads back to your company." "That's impossible. I would never—" Richard stopped. His face changed. "Wait, 5 years ago. That was right after Victoria and I started dating." Grace felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean? She was helping me with some investments, said she knew people in real estate who could diversify my portfolio." Richard's voice was hollow. "She introduced me to a group that specialized in southern properties. I signed off on a few deals without really looking at them. She said they were safe investments." "Did you ever look at them after?" "No, Victoria said they'd all been sold off, that they weren't worth tracking anymore." Richard sat down heavily. "Oh God, she was using my company, using my name, and I never even knew." Grace studied his face. The shock, the horror, the dawning realization. Either he was the greatest actor she'd ever seen, or he was telling the truth. "I believe you," she said finally. Richard looked up. "You do." Victoria was behind everything. My father's death, the attempt on Ethan, Charlotte's murder, all of it. Grace pulled out Diana's folder. "And I have proof." Richard took the documents with trembling hands, read through them. His face grew paler with each page. "This is monstrous," he whispered. I can't even comprehend this." "There's more." Grace took a deep breath. "My mother is alive, Richard. Victoria knew her in college. They were roommates. Victoria used their connection to target my family, and when that wasn't enough, she found her way to you." "Your mother is alive?" "Diana Carter. She was committed after a violent episode when I was 3. My father told me she was dead, but she got out of prison 5 years ago. She's been tracking Victoria ever since." Richard set down the documents. His face was ashen. "Grace, I am so sorry. for everything my company was used for everything Victoria did in my name. If I had known you didn't know, that's not your fault." Grace sat down across from him. "But now we have a decision to make. We can give this evidence to the police and hope they build a case, or we can use it ourselves to make sure Victoria never gets out of jail." "What do you mean?" "The bail hearing is tomorrow. Victoria's lawyers are going to argue she's not a flight risk, that she has ties to the community, that she's a respectable woman from a good family." "Yes?" Grace's eyes were hard. "What if we prove otherwise? What if we show the judge exactly who Victoria Sinclair really is?" Richard stared at her for a long moment, then a cold smile spread across his face. "Tell me what you need me to do." Secondly, at 3:15 p.m., Grace met Diana at a coffee shop outside Hartford. Mother and daughter sat across from each other, still strangers, still learning how to exist in each other's presence. "Thank you for the documents," Grace said. "They're exactly what we needed." "You're going to use them at the bail hearing. Richard's lawyers are already preparing. If everything goes according to plan, Victoria will be denied bail and charged with additional counts of fraud, conspiracy, and murder." Diana nodded slowly. "Good. That woman destroyed our family. She deserves to rot." "She will. I'll make sure of it." Diana reached across the table and touched Grace's hand. "I know I wasn't there for you. I know I missed your whole life, but I want you to know I thought about you every single day, every birthday, every Christmas, every night when I lay in that cell and wondered what kind of woman my daughter was becoming." Grace felt tears prick her eye. "Why didn't you try to find me sooner after you got out?" "I did, but your father had covered his tracks well, and honestly..." Diana's voice broke. "I was afraid. Afraid you would hate me. Afraid you wouldn't believe me about what really happened. Afraid that finding you would only cause more pain. But you came anyway. When I found out about Victoria and the Thompson connection, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore, not if there was a chance you were in danger." Grace squeezed her mother's hand. "I don't hate you. I don't know how to feel yet, but I don't hate you." Diana wiped her eyes. "That's more than I deserve." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Grace asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Did you know about Dad's depression, about his struggles?" Diana nodded sadly. "James always carried darkness inside him, even when we were young. He hid it well, but I knew. That's part of why I was so paranoid after you were born. I was terrified something would happen to him, that he would give in to the shadows. But he didn't, not really, even at the end." "What do you mean?" "He saved the animals," Grace said. "Whatever happened that night, whatever demons he was fighting, his last act was making sure those creatures survived. That's not giving up. That's choosing what matters most." Diana was crying openly now. "He was always better than me, stronger, kinder. I never deserved him." "Maybe none of us deserve the people we love," Grace said softly. "Maybe we just have to try to be worthy of them." At 8:47 p.m., Grace sat in Ethan's room watching him sleep. Tomorrow would change everything. The bail hearing, the evidence, the truth finally coming to light. But tonight, in this moment, all that mattered was a little boy breathing peacefully in his bed. "I found out who killed my father," she whispered to his sleeping form. "And I found out my mother is alive. My whole life just got turned upside down." She smiled through her tears. "But you know what, I wouldn't trade any of it, because it brought me to you." She leaned down and kissed his forehead. "Sleep well, little man. Tomorrow we finish this. And then we start building something new, something good, something that no one can ever take away from us." Outside, the October night was cold and clear. Stars glittered overhead like promises. And Grace Carter, daughter of a murdered man-child of a broken family, sat in the darknesses and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The morning of the bail hearing arrived cold and gray. Grace woke at 5:15 a.m., her heart already pounding. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Victoria's face. That cold, calculating smile. Those dead eyes that hid a monster. Today, that monster would face justice. She dressed quickly and went to check on Ethan. The little boy was still asleep, his stuffed rabbit tucked under his chin, completely unaware of the battle about to be fought on his behalf. "Stay safe, little man," she whispered. "This ends today." Richard was already in the kitchen when she came downstairs. 2 cups of coffee sat on the counter. He handed her one without a word. "The lawyers are ready," he said. His voice was steady, but she could see the tension in his jaw. "They've reviewed all the documents, Diana's evidence, the financial records, everything. They think we have a strong case." Think isn't good enough. We need certainty. In law, there's no such thing as certainty. Richard set down his cup. But there's one more thing, something I didn't tell you yesterday. Grace felt her stomach tighten. What? I had my security team dig into Victoria's background. Really dig, beyond what Diana found. He pulled a folder from his briefcase. They discovered something that changes everything. See? Grace took the folder, opened it, and felt the blood drain from her face. Charlotte's medical records, Richard said quietly. The ones from the night Ethan was born. Victoria had access to them before anyone else. She was listed as Charlotte's emergency contact, and the midwife who administered the fatal medication, she received a payment of $50,000 2 days later from an offshore account linked to Victoria's family trust. The evidence was damning, irrefutable, the final nail in Victoria's coffin. Why didn't you show me this yesterday? Because I needed to be sure. I needed to see it with my own eyes before I could accept that the woman I was going to marry killed my wife. Richard's voice broke. I love Charlotte more than my own life, Grace. And Victoria was there, holding my hand, crying with me, telling me how sorry she was, while knowing she was the one who took Charlotte away. Grace reached out and touched his arm. We're going to make her pay. For Charlotte, for my father, for everything. I know. Richard straightened his shoulders. Let's finish this. The courthouse was packed by 8:30 a.m. News of Victoria Sinclair's arrest had spread through Connecticut's elite circles like wildfire. The gallery was filled with reporters, socialites, and curious onlookers who wanted to witness the fall of one of their own. Grace sat in the front row with Richard. Diana was behind them wearing a simple black dress that made her look smaller than she was. Derek had come too despite everything. He said he needed to see justice done. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, Victoria was brought in. She looked different from the last time Grace had seen her. Prison hadn't been kind. Her perfect hair was limp. Her designer clothes had been replaced with an orange jumpsuit. But her eyes were the same. Cold. Calculating. Utterly devoid of remorse. Those eyes found Grace across the courtroom. Victoria's lips curled into a smile that made Grace's skin crawl. All rise. The Honorable Judge Patricia Williams presiding. The judge was a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair and no patience for nonsense. She sat down and surveyed the courtroom. With sharp eyes. We're here to determine whether the defendant, Victoria Sinclair, should be granted bail pending trial. I've reviewed the prosecution's initial filing and the defense's motion. She turned to Victoria's lawyer. Mr. Hartley, you may begin. Victoria's lawyer was smooth, polished, expensive. Your Honor, my client is a respected member of this community. She has no prior criminal record. She has strong ties to the area and significant financial means that ensure she will appear for all court dates. The charges against her, while serious, are based largely on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of unreliable witnesses. Unreliable witnesses. The judge raised an eyebrow. Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution's primary witness is a woman who spent 22 years in prison for violent assault and has a documented history of mental illness. Her claims should be viewed with extreme skepticism. Grace felt Diana stiffen beside her. She reached back and squeezed her mother's hand. The prosecutor, a fierce woman named Sarah Chen, stood next. Your Honor, the people have substantial evidence linking Ms. Sinclair to multiple serious crimes, including the murder of Charlotte Thompson, the attempted murder of Ethan Thompson, and conspiracy to commit murder in the case of James Carter. Objection, Hartley interrupted. My client has not been charged with any crimes related to this James Carter. Not yet, Chen said calmly, but we're presenting evidence today that will warrant additional charges. The judge's eyes sharpened. I'll allow it. Continue. Chen spent the next hour laying out the case against Vincent Victoria. The financial records showing her connection to the Georgia land deal, the payments to the midwife, the burner phone messages, the security footage from the Thompson mansion. With each piece of evidence, Victoria's mask slipped a little more. Her confident smile faded. Her shoulders tensed. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles went white. Then Chen called her first witness. The people called Diana Carter to the stand. Diana walked to the witness box with her head held high. She'd spent the last week preparing for this moment. Grace had helped her rehearse. Richard's lawyers had coached her on what to expect. But nothing could truly prepare someone to face the woman who had destroyed their family. Ms. Carter, Chen began, please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant. Victoria and I were roommates at Columbia University. We were close friends for 2 years. And during that time, did the defendant ever express interest in your family's land holdings in Georgia? Yes, multiple times. Victoria was obsessed with real estate even back then. She talked about how land was the only investment that truly mattered. She asked me detailed questions about my husband's wildlife sanctuary, where it was located, how much acreage, what it might be worth. Objection, Hartley said. Relevance? Your Honor, this establishes a pattern of behavior that spans decades, Chen replied. Overruled. Continue. Diana's testimony went on for nearly an hour. She described Victoria's transformation after her family lost their money, the cold calculation that replaced her former warmth. The way she cut off contact with Diana immediately after her breakdown. I was nothing to her once I couldn't be useful anymore, Diana said quietly. And I believe my husband was nothing to her either, just an obstacle between her and something she wanted. Objection? Speculation. Withdrawn. Chen smiled slightly. No further questions. Hartley's cross-examination was brutal. Miss Carter, you spent 22 years in prison, correct? Yes. For violently assaulting a man and nearly killing him? Yes. And you have a documented history of paranoid delusions and violent episodes? Diana's voice stayed steady. I had mental illness that went untreated. I've been in recovery for many years. But you still take medication for your condition? Yes. So the court should trust the testimony of a mentally ill woman who spent 2 decades behind bars. Hartley's voice dripped with contempt. The court should trust the evidence, Diana replied calmly. I'm not asking anyone to take my word for anything. The documents speak for themselves. Hartley's face flickered with frustration. He'd expected to rattle her. She hadn't rattled. No further questions. The next witness changed everything. The people call Grace Carter to the stand. Shit. Grace walked to the witness box, her heart pounding. Victoria's eyes followed her every step, burning with hatred. Ms. Carter, Chen began, please describe your employment at the Thompson residence. Grace told her story, the cleaning job, the snake attack, her promotion to Ethan's caregiver, the threatening notes, the window that had been pried open, the piece of fabric caught in the ivy. And on the night in question, what did you observe? I saw Victoria Sinclair entering Derek Webb's room after midnight. I watched her plant evidence in his desk drawer, an envelope that police later claimed connected him to the thefts. Objection. The witness couldn't possibly have identified anyone in the dark. There was moonlight from the window, Grace said evenly, and I recognized her perfume. It's a custom blend. I'd smelled it 100 times. The courtroom murmured. The judge banged her gavel. Continue, Ms. Carter. Grace described the confrontation with Lucas. Vanessa's attempted frame-up, the fight in the kitchen, and finally, Victoria's confession. She said Charlotte didn't die in childbirth. She said she made sure of that. Those were her exact words. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged her gavel repeatedly. Order, order in this court. Victoria was on her feet screaming. She's lying. She's lying about everything. Sit down, Ms. Sinclair. This is a conspiracy. They're all working together to destroy me. Bailiff, restrain the defendant. 2 officers grabbed Victoria's arms. She struggled against them, her face twisted with rage. You think you've won, she screamed at Grace. You haven't won anything. I'll destroy you. I'll destroy all of you. You don't know who you're dealing with. Remove the defendant from the courtroom. They dragged Victoria away, still screaming threats. The doors slammed behind her, cutting off her voice. The judge sat in silence for a long moment. Then she turned to the prosecution. Ms. Chen, is there additional evidence you wish to present? Yes, Your Honor. We have one more witness, one the defense doesn't know about. Hartley jumped to his feet. Objection. The prosecution can't spring surprise witnesses. This witness came forward just this morning, Your Honor. We had no opportunity to disclose earlier. The judge considered. I'll allow it. Call your witness. Chen took a deep breath. The people call Margaret Walsh to the stand. Grace's heart stopped. Margaret, the cook, the woman who had seen Victoria coming home with a cooler the night before the snake attack. Margaret walked to the stand looking terrified, but determined. She'd worked for the Thompson family for 15 years. She had no reason to lie. Ms. Walsh, Chen said gently, please tell the court what you observed on the night of October 15th. Margaret's voice shook, but her words were clear. She described seeing Victoria return to the mansion after midnight, carrying a cooler she hadn't had when she left. I thought it was strange, Margaret said, but I didn't want to make assumptions. Ms. Sinclair was always particular about the staff knowing their place. Did you see what was in the cooler? No, but the next day when I heard about the snake in the garden, Margaret's voice broke. I just knew something was wrong. Why didn't you come forward sooner? I was afraid. Margaret looked down at her hands. Ms. Sinclair has powerful friends. I have a daughter in college. I couldn't risk my job, my family's security. But when I heard about everything else she'd done, I couldn't stay silent anymore. Hartley's cross-examination was vicious, but Margaret held firm. She wasn't a mentally ill ex-convict. She wasn't a stranger with an agenda. She was a longtime employee with no reason to lie and nothing to gain from testifying. Her testimony was the final blow. At 2:47 p.m., Judge Williams delivered her ruling. Based on the evidence presented, I find that the defendant poses a significant flight risk and a danger to the community. Bail is denied. The defendant will be held without bond pending trial. The courtroom exploded. Reporters scrambled for the exits. Cameras flashed. Richard grabbed Grace's hand and squeezed so tight she thought her bones might break. It was over. Victoria Sinclair would never hurt anyone again. 3 months later, Victoria's trial concluded with a guilty verdict on all counts. Murder in the first degree for Charlotte Thompson. Attempted murder for Ethan Thompson. Conspiracy to commit murder for James Carter. Fraud. Money laundering. Witness intimidation. The list went on for 2 pages. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Grace sat in the courtroom as the sentence was read, Diana on one side, Richard on the other. Ethan was home with Derek, too young to understand what was happening, but safe. Finally, completely safe. Victoria showed no emotion as the judge spoke. No tears, no remorse. Just that same cold emptiness that had been there from the beginning. But as the bailiffs led her away, she turned and looked at Grace one last time. "This isn't over," she mouthed silently. "It will never be over." Grace held her gaze without flinching. "Yes, it is," she mouthed back. The doors closed. Victoria was gone. And Grace Carter was finally free. The funeral for James Carter was held on a crisp November morning. Not a real funeral. His body had been buried 5 years ago, but Grace needed closure. A proper goodbye. A chance to honor the father she'd lost and the truth she'd finally found. They held the service at the site of the old wildlife sanctuary. The housing development had been purchased by a conservation trust Richard established in James's name. The houses would be demolished. The land would become a wildlife refuge once again. Grace stood at the spot where the main building used to be, surrounded by the people who had become her family. Richard. Ethan clutching her hand. Diana still a stranger in many ways, but learning to be a mother again. Derek loyal and steady. Margaret brave despite her fears. My father dedicated his life to saving creatures that couldn't save themselves. Grace said, her voice carrying across the empty field. He taught me that every life has value, that the measure of a person isn't what they take from the world, but what they give back to it. She paused, feeling tears slide down her cheeks. For 5 years I thought I failed him. I thought if I'd been faster, stronger, braver, I could have saved him. But I know now that's not true. My father made his choice. He stayed in that building because he wanted to make sure every animal got out safely. He gave his life for creatures that couldn't speak for themselves. She looked at the ground where her father had died. I'm going to honor his legacy. This land will become the James Carter Wildlife Sanctuary. Children will come here to learn about animals. Injured creatures will be rehabilitated and released. And my father's dream will live on long after all of us are gone. She knelt and placed a single rose on the grass. I love you, Dad, and I finally understand. Rest now. I'll take it from here. 1 year later, the sanctuary opened to its first visitors. Grace stood at the entrance, watching families stream through the gates. Children pointed excitedly at the animal enclosures. Parents read the educational signs James would have loved. Volunteers in green shirts answered questions with enthusiasm and patience. Ethan, now 4 years old, tugged at her hand. Gracie, look, the hawks. She followed his pointing finger to the rehabilitation center, where a red-tailed hawk spread its wings in a test flight. It would be released next week, fully healed, ready to soar. Beautiful, isn't it? She said. Can I feed the snakes today? Grace laughed. Maybe when you're a little older, buddy. Richard appeared beside her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. The governor called. She wants to do a ribbon-cutting ceremony next month. Photo op with the Thompson Foundation. You mean the Carter Thompson Foundation? That's what I said. They smiled at each other. Something had changed between them in the past year. something neither of them had planned or expected, a friendship that had grown into something deeper, something Grace wasn't ready to name but wasn't willing to lose. "There's something I need to tell you," Richard said. "I've been waiting for the right moment, but I don't think there ever will be a perfect time." Grace felt her heart speed up. "What is it?" "I'm selling the Connecticut mansion. It has too many memories, too much darkness." He paused. "I'm moving here. To Georgia. Ethan loves it. I love it. And I want to be closer to the sanctuary, closer to the work we're doing." "Richard, you don't have to." "I want to." He took her hand. "Grace, you saved my son's life. You exposed the woman who murdered my wife. You gave me back my faith in humanity when I'd almost lost it completely. I'm not saying this because I feel obligated. I'm saying it because for the first time in years, I can imagine a future. And you're in it." Grace couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight. "I'm not asking for anything," Richard continued. "I'm just telling you where I stand. Whatever happens between us, whatever form it takes, I want you in my life. You and Ethan and this crazy new family we've somehow built." "Richard," Grace finally found her voice, "I don't know if I'm ready for what you're offering. I don't know if I'll ever be ready. My whole life has been about survival, about protecting myself, about never letting anyone get too close." "I know, but I'm willing to try." She squeezed his hand. "I'm willing to see where this goes, one day at a time, one step at a time, if you can be patient with me." Richard's smile was like sunlight. "I've waited 3 years to find someone real. I can wait a little longer." Diana found Grace at the hawk enclosure later that afternoon. Mother and daughter stood side by side watching the birds test their healing wings. "You did something beautiful here," Diana said. "Your father would be proud." "I hope so." "I know so." Diana turned to face her. "Grace, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Okay." "Can you ever forgive me for not being there, for missing your whole childhood, for being too broken to be the mother you deserved?" Grace was quiet for a long moment. She'd thought about this question for months, turned it over and over in her mind, examined it from every angle. "I forgave you a long time ago," she finally said. "You were sick. You didn't choose to be sick, and you've spent the last year trying to make amends even though you don't owe me anything." "I owe you everything." "No, you gave me life. You brought me into this world. Whatever happened after that wasn't your fault." Grace took her mother's hand. "I don't need you to be perfect, Mom. I just need you to be here. Can you do that?" Diana was crying. "I can do that. I promise I can do that." They embraced two broken women finding each other across decades of pain and separation. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation. It wasn't instant healing. But it was a start. And sometimes, that's all you need. 5 years later, Grace stood at the gates of the sanctuary watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. So much had changed. The James Carter Wildlife Sanctuary was now one of the largest in the Southeast. They'd rehabilitated over 3,000 animals, educated tens of thousands of children, become a model for conservation programs across the country. Richard had proposed 2 years ago. They'd married in a small ceremony at the sanctuary surrounded by the animals James had loved and the family they'd built together. Ethan was 9 now, tall for his age, with his father's serious eyes and his mother's gentle heart. He spent every afternoon at the sanctuary learning about the animals, helping with feeding, becoming exactly the kind of compassionate person Grace had always known he could be. Diana lived in the cottage at the edge of the property. She'd become an essential part of the operation, managing volunteers and coordinating educational programs. The darkness that had haunted her for so long had finally lifted. She'd found purpose, found peace, found her daughter again. Derek had married a veterinarian who worked at the sanctuary. They had twin girls who called Grace Aunt Gracie and treated Ethan like a big brother. Margaret had retired from the Thompson household and now ran the sanctuary's cafe, serving coffee to visitors and telling stories about the old days to anyone who would listen. And Grace herself had become something she never imagined she could be. A wife, a mother, a leader, a healer, the woman her father had always known she could become. "Mom." She turned to see Ethan running toward her, his face lit up with excitement. "The eagle's ready. Dr. Chen says we can release it tomorrow. Can I be the one to open the cage? Please?" Grace laughed and ruffled his hair. "We'll see. You have to finish your homework first." "I already did. Dad helped me with the math." "Then maybe, if you eat all your vegetables at dinner." Ethan made a face but didn't argue. He'd learned that negotiating with Grace was a losing battle. Richard appeared behind him, their 5-year-old daughter Sarah on his shoulders. The little girl had Grace's dark eyes and Richard's stubborn streak. "Daddy says I can name the new baby Hawk," Sarah announced. "Did he now? I'm going to call her Princess Featherbottom." Grace exchanged a look with Richard. He shrugged helplessly. "Princess Featherbottom it is," Grace said, and Sarah squealed with delight. They walked together toward the main building where Diana was waiting with dinner. The sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the land her father had loved. Grace paused at the memorial stone they'd placed near the entrance. A simple marker with her father's name and the words he'd lived by. The measure of a life is not how long it lasts, but how much love it leaves behind. "I did it, Dad," she whispered. "I found my purpose. I found my family. I found my way home." The wind rustled through the trees like an answer. That night, after the children were asleep, Grace sat on the porch with Richard watching stars emerge one by one. "Happy?" he asked. "Yes." She leaned into his shoulder. "For the first time in my life, completely happy." "You know I was thinking about the day we met. Really met, I mean. When you walked into my office after saving Ethan from that snake." "What about it?" "I asked you who you really were, and you told me about your father and the sanctuary." Richard turned to look at her. "But you never told me who you wanted to become." "I didn't know then." "Do you know now?" Grace thought about the question, about all the versions of herself she'd been. The grieving daughter, the invisible cleaning lady, the fierce protector, the woman who faced down killers and uncovered conspiracies and refused to stop fighting until justice was served. "I want to be someone who matters, she said finally. "Not famous, not powerful, just someone who makes a difference, who leaves the world a little better than she found it." "I think you've already done that." "Then I want to keep doing it every day for as long as I have." Richard kissed her forehead. "That sounds like a good plan." They sat in comfortable silence watching the night deepen around them. And Grace Carter, who had once been invisible, who had once been broken, who had once been running from a past she couldn't face, finally understood what it meant to be home. Not a place, not a building, not even a piece of land. Home was the people who loved you, the purpose that called you, the legacy you chose to build. Home was Ethan's laughter and Sarah's songs and Richard's steady presence. Home was Diana learning to be a mother again and Derek becoming a brother and Margaret telling stories over coffee. Home was the hawks spreading their healed wings and the snakes coiled peacefully in their enclosures and the children learning that nature was something to protect, not fear. Home was her father's memory, honored and alive, guiding her still. The next morning, Grace woke before dawn. She dressed quietly, careful not to wake Richard, and walked out to the eagle enclosure. The bird was magnificent, fully healed after 6 months of rehabilitation, ready to return to the sky where it belonged. "Today's your day," she told it softly. "You get to go home." The eagle fixed her with its fierce golden eyes, unafraid, unbroken, free. At 7:30 a.m., the whole family gathered for the release. Ethan opened the cage door with trembling hands, his face serious with the weight of the responsibility. The eagle hopped to the opening, looked around, spread its wings, and flew, up and up, circling higher, catching the thermals that would carry it wherever it needed to go. Grace watched until it was just a speck against the endless blue. "Goodbye," she whispered. "Be free?" Sarah tugged at her hand. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Grace smiled through her tears. "Because sometimes sweetheart happy things make you cry too." "That's weird." "I know, baby. But someday you'll understand." She gathered her family around her, Richard's arm around her waist. Ethan pressed against her side, Sarah in her arms, Diana and Derek and Margaret close by. This was her life now, this beautiful, improbable, hard-won life. Born from tragedy, forged in fire, made whole through love. Her father had taught her that every creature deserved protection, that the strong should shield the weak, that love meant sacrifice. She'd learned those lessons in ways he never could have imagined, and she would spend the rest of her life passing them on, because that's what family meant. That's what home meant. That's what it meant to truly, finally, completely live. Grace Carter had spent 37 years becoming who she was meant to be, a daughter who honored her father's memory, a child who forgave her mother's failures, a protector who stood between innocence and evil, a wife who found love in the ruins of tragedy, a mother who raised her children to be brave and kind, and in the end she understood the truth her father had tried to teach her all along. The bravest love is the kind that risks everything for someone who cannot protect themselves. That's the love that saves us. That's the love that redeems us. That's the love that makes us who we were always meant to become. Grace had been a cleaning lady who caught a snake and changed everything. Now she was so much more, and her story was proof that no matter how broken you are, no matter how lost you feel, no matter how dark the night becomes, there is always a way back to the light. All you have to do is keep fighting, keep believing, keep loving, and never, ever give up.